The story kicks off just how you'd expect. Mahmout Tigrul, a clueless kid who just passed the toughest military exam in Turkey, is chilling in some old ruins with his trusty golden eagle, Iskender, trying to figure out his next move. After gathering his thoughts, he heads back to the palace to officially snag the title of Pasha, something he's been busting his butt for, like, forever. That night, there's a festival going on, but instead of partying, Mahmout's got his nose in a book while other teens are dancing and chasing after pretty girls. His old buddy Ibrahim, who lives in another town, shows up and starts giving him a hard time for studying at a party, but he also congratulates Mahmout for finally making it to Pasha after all those sleepless nights. Mahmout knows Ibrahim too well to get mad at his jokes and asks about his family. Ibrahim says they're all good. While they're catching up, Shara, the best dancer in all of Alton, swings by to say hi. Ibrahim immediately recognizes her and introduces her to Mahmout. Shara's the kind of girl who's got everyone figured out, so she already knows what Mahmout's about and can't forget his intense, brooding vibe. She kneels and congratulates him on being the youngest Pasha ever. Then, out of nowhere, she grabs his hand and drags him to the dance floor, making him shake his stiff self to the beat. Everyone's watching and laughing as his friends force him to join in with the crowd. Mahmout toughs it out until it's finally over, then chills with Ibrahim on a hill, talking about his dreams of protecting the people. Ibrahim jokes that now that Mahmout's a big deal, he shouldn't forget the ladies. Mahmout tries to explain he's not into all that, but then realizes his diary's gone missing. Pissed off, he leaves Ibrahim and heads home, only to find Shara snoozing on his bed. She tries to mess with him, acting all flirty. When Mahmout tells her to get out, she pulls out his diary and starts teasing him again. Turns out she found it in the plaza and figured it was his. Mahmout tells her to leave, but he's not about to let her wander around the streets alone at night. So, he crashes on the roof instead and wakes up early the next morning to chase down a thief. While the cops are clueless, Mahmout tracks the thief down at a crossroads and orders him to drop the loot. The thief underestimates him, and Mahmout makes sure he won't forget it, using Iskender to teach him a painful lesson. Later that day, Mahmout gets called to an emergency meeting of the Alton Council as a Pasha. Before the meeting starts, a narrator fills us in on the tension between Turkey and the Balt Rhine Empire. Apparently, the Empire pulled a surprise attack on Turkey, sparking a short war. Things have been shaky between the two ever since. Now, the Empire's Prime Minister has been found dead, full of Turkian arrows. The Empire's pissed and sent a message to Turkey, warning them to send an envoy within 7 days or it's war. During the meeting, Zaganos Pasha and Halil Pasha, both big shots like Mahmout, get into it over what might happen if they start a fight with the Empire. Halil thinks it's a dumb move and way too risky, but Zaganos, who's all about war, is itching to throw hands. The whole council listens while they hash it out, and eventually, they decide to send a delegate to the Empire as a kind of peace offering to keep things chill. Before they can seal the deal, Mahmout shows up and pitches a third option, but Zaganos, being the jerk he is, shoots him down and calls him a naive kid for dreaming too big. Mahmout storms out, totally pissed. Later, Halil finds him venting somewhere random and decides to take a walk with him. He hears Mahmout out and realizes the guy's just trying his hardest to stop another war. Mahmout's frustrated he can't come up with a solution everyone can get behind. After hearing what's on Mahmout's mind, Halil tells him to quit sulking and do whatever it takes to stop the war. That's when Mahmout has a lightbulb moment. He dives into a 2-day investigation to prove Turkey's not behind the Prime Minister's murder. Finally, he cracks the case. The arrow feathers used in the crime aren't made from eagle feathers like Turkey's arrows, but some other material. Mahmout rushes to tell Halil what he found, only to discover Halil has already volunteered to be the fall guy. When Mahmout confronts Zaganos about it, Zaganos claims Halil made the choice on his own but mentions he just left, so there's still time to catch him. Mahmout hops on a horse and races after Halil, catching up with him on the road. Halil sees him coming and waits. As Mahmout approaches, he has a quick flashback to his childhood, remembering a day when he found some pretty gemstones in the mountains and tucked one into his pocket. Meanwhile, Empire Minister Virgilio Luith, the schemer behind the arrow setup, hears about Turkey's envoy and realizes what's going on. He updates his king, hinting that another unfortunate accident might be on the horizon. Back on the road, Mahmout tells Halil he doesn't need to take the blame. Halil reminds him how powerless they were back when the Empire crushed their nation. Mahmout recalls how awful that time was he lost his parents. Halil apologizes for being a coward back then and says this is his way of making up for it. Mahmout tells him to stop apologizing and shows him the arrow, explaining what he discovered. Halil thanks him and says this evidence is the only thing that can save Turkey from a pointless war. Fired up, Mahmout promises they'll stop the war together. The two keep traveling until they hit the ravines, where they're ambushed by assassins sent by Louis. But Mahmout and Halil saw it coming. They let the assassins think they've got the upper hand. Then Mahmout jumps out and takes them down with his smarts and his eagle. The next morning, they reach the Empire and present the evidence to the Emperor. After hearing them out, the Emperor clears Turkey of any wrongdoing and settles the issue. With their country safe for now, Mahmout and Halil head back home to report. Instead of a thank you, Zaganos, still a total jerk, warns Mahmout that his luck won't last forever. Meanwhile, Louis isn't ready to throw in the towel. Even though Mahmout ruined his plan, he cozies up to some nomads and promises to hand over the fortress city of Hisar if they team up with him. About 4 years ago, Mahmout met Ibrahim him for the first time during their military exams. Back then, Mammoot was this uptight rich kid who couldn't get over the war that took his family. He was all about working hard and avoided talking to anyone, always super serious about whatever he was doing to ace his exams. When the results came out, Mammoot and the other top scorers got this big parade in the city so everyone could see the new political hotshots. But now, Mammoot's sitting there thinking about how his dream of becoming Pasha to end world hunger when he graduated was just him being naive. Turns out, politics is way more complicated than he thought. Still lost in thought, Mammoot remembers how he kept his distance from his peers and how one time he totally bombed a drill because he couldn't get the others to follow his lead. That day, his trainer chewed him out so bad he went home in tears. Ibrahim, who became his best friend, rode home with him that night and couldn't believe his super serious buddy was bawling like a kid. Mammoot asked Ibrahim if he thought being Pasha was even worth it. Ibrahim, who wanted to become the Vali of his hometown, Hisar, told him if they both worked hard, they could make their dreams happen. The rest of the ride, Ibrahim kept hyping Mammoot up, telling him to stick to his goals and give it his all. Fast forward to now, Mammoot's totally blindsided by the news that his buddy Ibrahim, now the Vali of Hisar and the nicest guy ever, is rebelling against their country, Turkey, and teaming up with the Araba tribe to declare independence. None of it made any sense. While Mammoot was off writing poems and napping on rooftops, Ibrahim was out raiding a merchant's mansion, kicking his men out of the oasis, and enforcing martial law. When Zaganos, a guy who's always itching for a fight, hears about it, he jumps at the chance to lead his 4-0 soldiers to crush the rebellion in Hisar and bring things back to normal. That evening, Mammoot stops Zaganos right before he heads out and begs him to hold off, saying attacking one of their own might make things worse. But Zaganos tells him it's more serious than it looks. If Hisar becomes its own country, the Empire will attack it and use it as a gateway to invade Turkey, since Hisar is the fortress city keeping them out. Even after hearing this, Mammoot tries to convince Zaganos to back off, but Zaganos says he's more interested in finding out who's behind Ibrahim's actions. With that, Zaganos takes off. Mammoot's left wondering if Zaganos already knew about the rebellion before it even started. Determined to figure it out himself, Mammoot rides out that night with Shara to Hisar, hoping to reach Ibrahim before things spiral out of control. Meanwhile, Louis reports the rebellion to the Emperor and suggests sending troops to pretend to support Araba so they can sway public opinion and officially claim Hisar as their territory. The Emperor reminds Louis that the Turkish troops won't just sit around and wait for the Empire to act first. Louis then brings up Duchess Leleteric, or Lele, who's leading 10-0 infantrymen. The Emperor gives him the green light to send a signal after dark. Meanwhile, Ibrahim meets up with the leader of the Arabans in a tent where his whole family is being held. He promises to stick to their deal as long as the Arabans make sure the Hisar families are taken somewhere safe. One of the shady women warriors shows up and calls him out, saying he was dumb to trust so easily and let his people's families get taken hostage just based on someone's word. At the same time, Shara and Mammoot sneak into Hisar territory dressed as women. They slip into the tent and realize the whole place where the families are being held is soaked in oil. Mammoot starts freaking out, thinking his worst fears might actually be true. Just then, word gets to the tent that Zaganos' forces are closing in on Hisar. Everyone starts panicking since this wasn't part of the plan. One of the taller guys from the enemy army steps in, calms everyone down, and says they need to wait for the Imperial army to show up before doing anything stupid. He turns to Ibrahim and tells him what he needs to do to stop Zaganos' forces from entering the city. Ibrahim leaves the tent and heads to the walls to hold them off. On his way, he spots Mammoot and jokingly compliments his disguise. Mammoot hears his voice and realizes he has to act fast. When Ibrahim gets to the wall, he orders his men to get ready to fire as soon as the sun comes up to keep Zaganos' forces away from the gates. He knows they're outnumbered and outclassed, and it's only a matter of time before they're overwhelmed. Zaganos, on the other hand, is running through all the possible outcomes in his head and realizes showing up early has totally messed up the Empire's plan to take over Hisar. Once daylight hits, his forces will attack the fortress and reclaim Hisar. Just before the battle kicks off, Zaganos gets word that Lele's massive 40,000-strong army is also heading for Hisar. Lele realizes Zaganos beat her to it and isn't too happy about it. She tells Louis how annoyed she is. Her right-hand man, Glalat, offers to kill the Emperor's envoy, who came with them so they can start fighting Zaganos right away. For now, they decide to stay quiet and see how things play out. Zaganos knows he's made a big mistake and wishes he'd done things differently. Ibrahim also senses the shift in the battle's vibe. He starts overthinking about how to save his family and his people. While he's spiraling, one of his warriors shows up and reminds him how much he loves his country and Hisar. The warrior tells him they won't judge him if he has to take down Zaganos, but Ibrahim doesn't want his men to die for no reason. Meanwhile, a guard from the Arabans catches Shara and Mahmoud off guard and demands to know who they are. Shara plays it cool and tricks the guard into thinking they're dancers there to entertain everyone. The guard buys it and calls some other Arabans over to join the fun. While dancing, Shara casually asks how they found out about Hisar becoming its own nation. One of them says it was a kind minister from the Empire who told them and gave them instructions about what to do. Shara cuts through the nonsense and keeps the crowd entertained by dancing with them. The tall guy from earlier hears the commotion outside and sends one of his men to deal with it. Before they can get there, Mammoot steps up and exposes the Empire's plan to use the Arabans for their own political agenda. Hearing this, the Arabans start questioning everything. The tall guy leaves the tent to Eleanor, the sketchy woman from before, and confronts Mammoot privately. He grills Mammoot about his earlier actions, trying to figure out where he stands. Mammoot, confident in himself, talks big and tells the guy he's here to avenge his friend and save him from people like him and the Empire. The tall guy tells Mammoot to stop letting his emotions run the show and act like a real politician, unlike Ibrahim, but Mammoot isn't having it. He attacks the guy, breaking his sword to reveal what's hidden inside. After their fight, the tall guy orders Mammoot to drop his weapon or he'll blow a whistle that'll signal his men to set the oil-soaked tent on fire. Mammoot gives in and drops his weapon, letting the guy trash-talk him and his beliefs. After rambling on with a bunch of inconsistent nonsense about Mammoot and his ideals, the jerk takes another cheap shot at him, leaving him hurt even more, before finally lifting his head and warning Mammoot to never even think about double-crossing the Empire again. Mammoot keeps quiet, trusting the rest of his plan to his loyal golden eagle, Iskender. Meanwhile, over in Hisar, the Arabans start grilling Eleanor and the Empire's warriors about the accusations Mammoot threw their way. Instead of calming them down, Eleanor straight up threatens to torch the tent and take their families down with it if they don't shut up and behave. On the wall, Ibrahim notices all the commotion in town and wonders what's going on. But for now, all he can do is wait and hope the Imperial army shows up like they promised. If they don't, he and his family are toast. Outside the walls of Hisar, Zaganos' forces are stuck in a stalemate. Zaganos himself is hesitant about his next move, not wanting to screw things up again. To shift the odds in his favor, he decides to use a special poison on the 40,000-strong army. Meanwhile, Lele is getting restless, tired of waiting for Louise's Rodorm official to give the signal to attack the Torqueans. To speed things up, she sends her dog, Glalet, to mess with the official. Back at the camp, Eleanor catches Shara trying to cut the tent open to free the prisoners. Eleanor shuts her down, stopping her from messing up her plans, and demands to know what she's up to. Around the same time, Lele finally takes care of the official and rallies her troops for battle. Mammoot, meanwhile, is still getting his butt kicked by the tall, arrogant jerk who just won't stop ranting about his selfish ideals. Mammoot doesn't see eye to eye with him and even tries to argue, but let's just say it doesn't go his way. Luckily, Iskender makes it back with a squad of wild eagles to help Mammoot pull off his plan. Shara stays quiet, waiting for the right moment. When the time comes, Iskender and his eagle crew lift the tent's fabric, freeing Ibrahim's people and torching the Imperial soldiers holding them captive. From the wall, Ibrahim sees the tide turning and orders his men to open the gates and let Zaganos and his troops into Hisar. Mammoot finally gets the upper hand, while Lele, the useless Duchess, retreats to the Empire since her plan has completely fallen apart. To cover their mess, Lele and Glalat make it look like the official was crushed by a boulder. Mammoot, now back on his feet, grabs his sword and goes after the tall jerk with everything he's got. Dodging some of the guy's attacks, Mammoot manages to get him in a chokehold. He makes his ancestors proud by choking the life out of the guy and leaving his body to rot. With the fight behind him, Mammoot heads back to Torquay to face the Divan and the other 13 Pashas, ready to regroup and figure out the next move. At the start of the Divan, Ibrahim has to defend himself against the accusations thrown at him. He says everything he did was for his family and Torquay. When asked why he left his city for Alton, he explains he went there during the festival to attend a meeting organized by Zaganos. The king questions Zaganos, and he backs up Ibrahim's story. Then Mahmoud is told to explain why he let the people of Hisar go, even though they tried to betray Torquay. Turns out, Mahmoud convinced Zaganos to release the Arabans by reminding him of his past mistake and pointing out that the Arabans were the ones who drove the Imperial soldiers back to their land. Realizing his error, Zaganos let the Arabans go. Afterward, Mammoot thanked Shara for her help and returned home. He also explained that if they had harmed the Arabans, it could have sparked a rebellion against Torquay, which might have given the Empire a reason to attack. Once all the facts were laid out, the council wrapped up the meeting to deliberate. While waiting for their decision, Mahmoud thought back to his last conversation with Ibrahim after saving his people and twins from the enemy. Ibrahim was worried about his future, since he seemed to be the one who started the rebellion. Later, the Divan reconvened, and the verdict was announced. Ibrahim and Zaganos were pardoned as leaders of their communities, but Mahmoud was stripped of his title as Pasha and demoted to Binbashi, serving under Halil Pasha of the 7th province. Ibrahim was furious, not understanding why Mahmoud was being punished for something he did. Mahmoud kept quiet and went to see Halil after the meeting. Halil stayed calm and asked Mahmoud why he wanted to be a Pasha. Mahmoud gave the obvious answer, to stop another war, but Halil pointed out that Mahmoud had been selfish, abandoning his duties as Pasha to save a friend. While it was a noble act, it wasn't the right move for someone responsible for protecting the entire country. Losing his title, Halil said, would help Mahmoud learn how to truly protect Torquay. Mahmoud then asked if Torquay was planning to start a war, but Halil didn't answer. That night, Zaganos found Mahmoud sulking and indirectly thanked him for saving him from his mistake. Still, Zaganos made it clear that Mahmout's actions weren't entirely right, it just happened to work out. As a thank you, Zaganos gave Mammoot a Pyramus device, which he uses to communicate with his spies across different lands, including the Empire. Mammoot suddenly realized everything Zaganos had been doing behind the scenes and got really mad. But then he saw things from Zaganos' perspective and admitted he'd been blinded by his own selfishness. He accepted the gift and decided to head back to his hometown to learn how to be a better leader. Meanwhile, Louis, Lele, and Glalet were having lunch and talking about expanding their power and taking over Torquay. Louis vowed not to repeat his past mistakes. Now that he knew Zaganos had spies everywhere, his plan was to identify each one and take them out. Hearing this, the Duchess and Glalet raised their glasses to toast their upcoming victory over Torquay. During his trip back home, Mammoot dozes off and has the worst nightmare ever. In the dream, the dark thoughts in his head remind him what a screw-up he is, and rub it in that there's not much he can do now that he's no longer the Pasha. Luckily, he wakes up before veering off the road and finally makes it to his hometown, Yeni Tugrul village. When he steps off the carriage, Mammoot takes a moment to soak in the air of his old stomping grounds and feel the dirt where his mom and everyone else were buried after the war. He stares at the empty fields that used to be full of crops and life 12 years ago, wishing things hadn't changed, but he quickly snaps out of it and heads into the village to get started on his mission. Once in the village, Mammoot swings by the water shrine and offers up the Pyramus crystal as a prayer to activate it. He sends a colorful beam of light shooting into the sky, hoping one of Zaganos' spies will catch the signal and meet him, but no one shows up. That night, Iskender notices the weather's shifting. He tells Mammoot, who realizes it's time for the eagles to migrate north. This means he won't be able to use the wild eagles for any of his plans until winter rolls around. Mammoot thanks Iskender for the heads up and gives his eagle a quick pat. A few moments later, a drunk, washed-up old dude stumbles into the room. He introduces himself to Mammoot, who's totally confused. The guy, Barbaros, says he's the flag bearer and kulak for Tugrul village. Mammoot points out how old he is and asks why he's still in the gig. Barbaros explains his job and says he's actually a spy stationed in Tugrul. Kulaks are special spies trained to hang out at water shrines in different towns and cities across the continent. When a Zaganos agent shows up, the kulak IDs them and passes along any intel they've gathered. They also act as middlemen between agents to keep things running smoothly. Mammoot finally gets why he needs to visit water shrines every time he's in a new city. As for the latest news, Barbaros tells Mammoot that Louis has been hunting down spies in the Empire and wiping them out in just a week. Barbaros doesn't know how much Louis and his crew already know, but he warns Mammoot to stay sharp. Then Barbaros shares info about someone who's been trying to find Mammoot. A guy named Kulak Suleiman wants to meet him somewhere private. After meeting Barbaros, Mammoot heads to the spot, wondering what Suleiman could possibly want. Suleiman eventually shows up, greets him, and welcomes him to Zaganos' spy network. Meanwhile, Barbaros kicks back in his usual spot, waiting for the bosses to finish their chat. Suleiman introduces himself and his eagle, Katarina. Then he offers Mammoot some fine Tugrul wine, which brings back memories of his people before the war. They chat for a bit, and Suleiman gets to know Iskender, who's surprisingly male, and hears how Mammoot managed to tame him. After the small talk, Suleiman gets serious. With a sad look on his face, he starts telling his story. 12 years ago, when the war between Torquay and the Empire kicked off, Suleiman was chilling in the Republic of Florence, a place known for its good vibes, artsy folks, and romantic charm. Back then, he was out there partying and drinking with the rich and fancy crowd while his home village got taken over by Imperial soldiers. When he heard about Tugrul's death, he asked for some time off, but by the time he got back to his hometown, the war was done, and the whole village was wiped out. Feeling guilty for surviving while others didn't, Suleiman started wandering aimlessly around Torquay. One day, he ended up in Alton and ran into a group of idiots and shady characters cracking jokes about the war and Tugrul's sacrifice. That hit a nerve, so Suleiman went all in and fought them. That's when he met Zaganos, who was just a 14-year-old kid at the time. Zaganos could tell Suleiman was hurting and decided to give him a purpose, promising to make him a key player in his spy network once he became Pasha in 5 years. Suleiman thought the kid was full of it, but sure enough, 5 years later, Zaganos became Pasha. He tracked Suleiman down, who was working in some shop, and convinced him to join the spy game. Zaganos explained how information was power, showing how Florence used it to stay ahead even without a strong army. To seal the deal, Zaganos dropped a bombshell. The guy Suleiman used to work for in Florence was actually a spy for the president. That shook Suleiman so much he just went with it and accepted his new role. After that, he traveled the world and became one of the best spies out there. Fast forward to now, Mammoot is blown away by how sharp and bold Zaganos is. Suleiman picks up on Mammoot's low-key dislike for Zaganos and calls him out on it. Mammoot explains how Zaganos humiliated him during his first divan meeting, which makes Suleiman crack up. They chat and laugh about Zaganos being a cocky genius before calling it a night. Later, Louis sends his assassin squad, led by Eleanor, to sneak into Tugrul and take out Barbaros, one of Zaganos' kulaks, before Suleiman and Mammoot can return. Luckily, Barbaros is still quick and sharp. He spots Eleanor and her crew coming from a mile away and narrowly escapes. Realizing he's in danger, he signals for help. Suleiman and Mammoot hear the call and rush to save him. Just as Eleanor is about to finish Barbaros off, Mammoot and Suleiman show up. Mammoot goes after Eleanor first, using his weird eagle summoning rope trick. But Eleanor outsmarts him by tossing blood and meat all over him, making the eagles attack him instead. Mammoot gets wrecked by his own birds, but Suleiman knows the right sound to shoo them away, giving Mammoot time to clean himself up. While Mammoot's sorting himself out, Suleiman mocks Eleanor for thinking she's got the upper hand. Mammoot jumps back into the fight, ignoring Suleiman's advice, and goes straight for Eleanor. Big mistake. She destroys his rope thingy and almost takes him out. Barbaros creates a smokescreen, giving them a chance to escape to a nearby cave. Once inside, Suleiman gives Mammoot a reality check, telling him to stop acting solo because teamwork is the only way they'll win. They regroup and head back to the village, only to find Eleanor setting it on fire. This time, Suleiman and his crew work together to disarm Eleanor and her swordsman, landing a solid blow. Eleanor gets so beaten up she almost falls into the flames she started. Her two lackeys sacrifice themselves so she can escape. Furious at her failure, Eleanor manages to slip away again. At dawn, Suleiman says goodbye to Mammoot, telling him they'll meet again, but for now, he needs to report back to Zaganos and Alton. Before leaving, he reminds Mammoot that knowledge is power and urges him to focus on learning everything he can. Mammoot takes his advice and sets off for Phoenicia, the oldest port city in Rumeliana, to start his next adventure. Phoenicia is this old-school ocean empire with a crazy long history, almost 2,000 years deep. At the southern tip of the city, there's this epic lighthouse that's still holding onto pieces of the city's ancient vibe. Mammoot, our clueless main dude, just rolled into this fancy city, not really sure what's coming his way. He's walking in all proud, trying to stay under the radar and not draw any attention. But as soon as he hits the city gates, he spots an Imperial Navy ship chilling at the harbor and figures there's going to be some drama. To get the lowdown on what's up, Mammoot heads to the city's water shrine and uses his Pyramus crystal gadget to send out a signal for any kulak nearby to chat. Within seconds, Kulak Kiros, who's just casually sitting on a mat behind him, greets Mammoot and gives him the 411 on the city of Phoenicia. Turns out, the Phoenician Senate already knows Mammoot's in town and is probably planning to summon him as they speak. Oh, and that Imperial ship? It's a big red flag that trouble's brewing. Just as Kiros is filling him in, Senate officials roll up to invite Mammoot to meet Magistros Lord Konstantinos. Kiros quickly switches back to his beggar act, blending in like nothing happened. Mammoot accepts the invite, and on his way to the Senate Council, spots Glalit, someone he immediately recognizes, hanging out in the hallway. Eventually, he makes it to Konstantinos' office and meets the super hyped up leader of the state. After some polite chit-chat, Konstantinos gets straight to the point, asking Mammoot to join them in an emergency meeting to figure out how to handle a request from the Empire. Apparently, the Empire wants them to hand over part of their port for their fleet, and they've only got 10 days to respond. Konstantinos smells something fishy, especially since the Empire recently took over Theros. The other cities are on edge, and Konstantinos is all for it. He's actually daring the Empire to make a move so they can show them what a real empire looks like. The guy's living in the past, banking on old wins and glory days. He thinks the Empire's way of ruling through brute force is dumb and unfair. He asks Mammoot to back him up in this whole charade, and Mammoot reluctantly agrees. Next thing you know, Mammoot's in the emergency meeting with Konstantinos and the senators, hashing out how to respond to the Empire's demand. Konstantinos is all about going to war, but the more chill senators want to keep things peaceful and diplomatic. Konstantinos argues that giving up the lighthouse is basically handing over control of Centro to the Empire, which would be a total disaster for Torquay. No way can they let that happen. He reminds everyone of their edge over the Empire's forces, but someone else pipes up, saying it's straight up impossible to take on the Empire. Konstantinos fires back, pointing out that Mammoot already faced off with the Empire in Hisar and came out on top. He basically turns Mammoot into his ace card, hyping him up as this hero who beat the Empire. Mammoot tries to downplay it, but it's too late. Everyone's already buying into the hype. The debate gets heated, but Konstantinos ends up winning the argument. They decide to put it to a vote to make the final call. While the voting's going on, Konstantinos fills Mammoot in on their allies, the Venedic Armada, aka the top naval fleet in Centro. Their navy is way more experienced and could easily crush the Empire's fleet. Mammoot tries to convince him to avoid war, but it's already a done deal. By nightfall, everyone's gathered to hear the results of the vote. Konstantinos shows up late, grabs his lamp, and spills the news. Most of the senators voted to stand up to the Empire and defend their honor. Kulak Kiros pops up behind Mammoot and tells him he should bounce now while he still can, before things get messy and he's stuck. But Mammoot decides to stick around and see it through. Inside, he's torn up about not being able to stop the war. Konstantinos sends a message to the Empire's envoy, letting them know they're choosing war and won't back down. Glalat is floored by their response and signals the Duchess to start sailing their way. Lele sets sail for Phoenician territory and seems to be having a blast while doing it. Fast forward 15 days, and the Imperial Navy is laying siege to the walls of Phoenicia. The battle drags on for a whole day, with no real progress from the Empire. Konstantinos shows Mammoot just how brutal the Imperial army is. They send their slaves to fight first, before letting their actual soldiers step in. Meanwhile, inside the walls, everything's business as usual. Konstantinos keeps the people calm and fed, but Mammoot feels helpless and wishes he could do something to stop the war. At the next war meeting, the Phoenician senators are stressing about their ally, Venedik, not showing up. It's been 15 days since they sent the call for help, and the trip should only take 9. They're worried Venedik might have ditched them. Mammoot, who's been listening in, decides to pull off the impossible. He steps up and asks for a ship to sail through the Imperial Navy's blockade and go talk to Venedik himself. He's determined to figure out what's going on. Konstantinos thanks him for caring but says he trusts his buddy, the leader of Venedik, to keep his word. Mammoot thinks about Ibrahim and figures Louis must be doing everything he can to break the deadlock. What Mammoot doesn't know is that the Duchess and her crew are already on the other side of the supposedly unbreakable crystal cliffs. They're ready to climb the ancient cliffs and hit the Phoenicians with a sneak attack. Before making his move, Mahmoud meets up with Kiros to chat. Kiros opens up about his dad, who's a corrupt senator. He's hated his dad since he was a kid, and swore never to follow in his footsteps. After wandering the city for a while, he got caught by the Phoenician guard and met Suleiman. Back then, Kiros thought he was doing a great job as a spy and even mocked Suleiman. But Suleiman saw the fire in Kiros' eyes and recruited him on the spot to be a kulak. Later that night, Kiros and Mahmoud are walking down some stairs, talking about why Mahmoud's so set on going to Venedik to get reinforcements himself. Mahmoud gives the usual excuse about how the Phoenicians can't win the war without Venedik's help, but Kiros calls him out and asks for the real reason. Just as Mahmoud's about to answer, Kiros' lamp goes out, and the floor under Mahmoud gives way. Kiros catches him and keeps him from falling. Before pulling him back up, Kiros demands the truth. Mahmoud carefully thinks it over and finally says he's doing it for his country, Turkey. It's his duty to put his nation first, and if Kiros has a problem with that, he can let him go. Kiros sees Mahmoud's conviction, pulls him back up, and even praises him for reigniting his own spirit. Kiros promises to arrange a ship and crew to break through the blockade, so they can head to Venedik together. Meanwhile, Konstantinos calls out Caesarus Apollodorus, and gives him a hard time for ignoring the war. Konstantinos asks if he still thinks going to war with the Empire was a smart move. Konstantinos makes it clear he still stands by his choice to fight the Empire, but Apollodorus isn't totally on board and says he thinks they're making a huge mistake. He also warns Konstantinos that unless he stops acting all high and mighty, no one knows what's going to happen to the Phoenicians. Mahmoud stays in the background, watching the whole argument go down between the two. At the same time, Glalet orders the slaves on his ship to gear up for their 4th suicide mission in the war. His plan? Send them to climb the wall, knowing they'll probably get shot by Phoenician arrows, just to buy the Duchess time to scale the crystal wall from behind. The slaves, already fed up with being treated like disposable tools by the Imperial Navy, secretly plot an escape for the next night. Glalet switches up the guards and keeps rolling with Louis' plan. Meanwhile, Mahmoud tracks down Kiros on the outskirts of the city. Kiros takes him to a safe spot and helps him blend in while the makeshift crew loads their escape ship with supplies. Mahmoud changes into a new disguise and makes Kiros promise to survive this attempt. By nightfall, they double-check for anything they might have missed, so they're ready to roll. Mahmoud also gets to know the crew a bit as they all share some heartfelt moments before the chaos begins. After hearing their stories and words of encouragement, Mahmoud thanks them for risking their necks to be on this mission with him. With everything packed and ready, the only thing left is to lower the harbor chains without anyone noticing. Mahmoud and Kiros sneak into the control room to handle it manually. Just as they're about to get to work, they pause to listen to what's happening upstairs. Turns out, the slaves from earlier made it to the gates of Phoenicia on a smaller ship and are begging to surrender to the Magistros. At first, the Phoenicians think it's a trap set up by the Imperial Navy to trick them into opening the gates, but then the leader of the rebellion starts spilling his sob story, telling Konstantinos they're miners from another country and don't even know if their families are still alive. Kiros and Mahmoud stay near the communication pipes, eavesdropping on everything the survivors are saying. Before the slaves can finish, the Imperial soldiers start firing arrows at their ship, making the Phoenicians believe the deserters are legit. With the Imperial Navy closing in fast, the deserters keep pleading for the Phoenicians to let them in. After thinking it over, Konstantinos decides to give them a shot. To avoid any backlash, he calls for a vote, which ends up going his way. They start raising the harbor chains, but take a moment to calculate the tides to make sure everything's in their favor. Meanwhile, the Imperial fleet notices what's going on and speeds up to try to make it through the inner gates before the deserters can get inside. The Phoenician math whiz crunches the numbers and figures out they've got just enough time to shut the gates before the Imperial Navy barges into their city if they hustle. Konstantinos wastes no time dropping the harbor chains, opening up a path for the deserters to sail in. Once the deserters hear the chains are down, they paddle like their lives depend on it, trying to dock before the Imperial army shows up. As soon as the deserters get into the harbor, they start cranking the chains back up. But then Konstantinos notices something: the Imperial Navy ditched their ballast to make their ship lighter and faster. Nikepharos, the math guy, recalculates and realizes they're cutting it way too close. Still, they keep hauling those chains up as fast as they can. Just when it seems like they might make it, the seasonal winds kick in, giving the Imperial Navy an extra speed speed boost. Eventually, Glalat breaks through and forces his way into the city's harbor. Konstantinos is in a bind. He orders all his soldiers to surround Glalat's ship and keep it from docking. To make things worse, none of their own ships are ready for action. Frustrated, Konstantinos takes a moment to stew over his bad decisions before figuring out his next move. Meanwhile, Apollodorus watches the mess unfold, shaking his head as if hoping for a miracle. Luckily, Mammoot and Kiros manage to sail out just in time. They ram Glalat's ship and board it, ready to throw down with his crew. Mammoot calls his eagle, which swoops in and drops nails on the enemy fighters. After taking down the Elvaldi's mountain troops, Mammoot and his men capture them and head below deck to hunt for any stragglers. While Kiros and the others secure the deck, Glalat climbs back up to face Mammoot. Spotting Mammoot with another woman, Glalat challenges him to a fight. But before they clash, he recognizes Mammoot as the eagle bearer he saw earlier in Phoenicia. With nothing left to say, Glalat lets his sword do the talking. The two exchange blows, and Glalat tries to rattle Mammoot with some trash talk. Mammoot pauses for a second and calls his eagle, Iskender, for backup. Iskender swoops in, distracting Glalat, who tries to douse the bird in oil. Glalat keeps pressing the attack and almost takes Mammoot down, but one of Mammoot's men suddenly drops the ship's anchor, throwing Glalat off balance and letting them capture him. Kiros shows up, ties Glalat and his men up, and gives them a choice: surrender and live. But Glalat just keeps running his mouth, stalling for time so the Duchess and her soldiers can sneak into the city. Mammoot doesn't catch on to Glalat's plan and keeps listening to his nonsense. Eventually, Glalat spills the beans about Louis' scheme for Mammoot's homeland. Then, Glalat and his men decide to go down swinging, planning to take Mammoot and his crew with them. Mammoot and Kiros waste precious time humoring Glalat's antics. By the time they figure out what's really happening, it's too late. Mammoot turns around to see Phoenicia up in flames. The Duchess and her troops have already scaled the city's unbreakable walls and stormed in. Mammoot stands there in shock, watching the city he thought was untouchable burn to the ground right in front of him. Soon, the other folks in the Phoenician state, including the clueless idiot Konstantinos, spot the flames tearing through their homes and families in the distance. Meanwhile, the rest of the Phoenician Senate finally gets it. The naval attack was just a big distraction to pull their focus away from the land army sneaking in to wreck them. They were doomed from the start, all because they didn't have a strategy genius like Louis calling the shots. As the Senate spirals into panic, Konstantinos stubbornly tells his people not to lose hope. The guy actually thinks his wishful thinking can somehow save their sinking city. But let's be real at this point. Nobody in the Senate is buying what he's selling. Yet, this dude still has the nerve to shout orders, telling his soldiers to hold off the Imperial Army while waiting for the Venedic Armada to swoop in and save the day. He even tries giving commands to the troops through sound pipes, but Apollodorus, being done with his nonsense, fills the pipes with water to block him out. At one point, Apollodorus confronts Konstantinos face to face, showing him the mess he's dragged Phoenicia into. He warns that if they keep listening to this failure of a leader, the entire city will be wiped out by sunrise. Konstantinos just keeps yelling about his ideals, but Apollodorus tunes him out and pushes the Senate to vote on surrendering to the Imperial Army. By the end of the vote, everyone agrees to surrender. Feeling betrayed, Konstantinos decides to end it all so he doesn't have to watch his city crumble under the Empire's rule, but Apollodorus stops him and raises the white flag to surrender. That day, the Imperial Army made history as the first and only force to break through the supposedly unbreakable crystal wall. They immediately declare victory. Mammoot and his crew quickly realize it's way too dangerous to stick around, so they quietly sail out of Phoenician waters to avoid getting caught by the Imperial Army. Meanwhile, Phoenician soldiers abandon their posts and rush home to try to save their families. In the chaos, Kiros and his squad manage to smuggle the badly injured Mammoot out of the city. Now, their mission is to sneak him out of enemy waters and find a doctor to patch him up. Before leaving the ship, Kiros promises his crew he'll come back for them, but his friends know Mammoot Pasha will need someone to look out for him, so they insist Kiros go with him, vowing to hold down the fort until he returns to reclaim their city from the Empire. Mammoot, still weak, thanks Kiros' crew for having his back. Elsewhere, Konstantinos comes face to face with the Duchess. He still has the audacity to ramble on about how power should be used, but the Duchess shuts him down real quick, reminding him that words mean nothing to those who actually hold real power. She slices his shoulder, letting him see his life flash before his eyes, and then finishes him off. Apollodorus and the other senators show up to pledge their loyalty to the Empire, officially marking the end of the Phoenician War. After sailing for a few hours away from Phoenicia, Mammoot and Kiros finally breathe easy since they're out of enemy range. They keep cruising for another 4 hours until they run straight into the Venedic Armada fleet. At the same time, the captain of the Armada spots them and orders his crew to bring the two guys on board. When Kiros and an injured Mammoot show up, the captain introduces himself as Silvestro Brega and offers them asylum on his ship out of respect for the alliance with Phoenicia. But instead of taking the offer, Mammoot, ignoring his injuries, gets fired up and demands the captain explain why they ditched Phoenicia when the Imperial soldiers attacked. Brega starts running his mouth, claiming they never betrayed Phoenicia. Turns out, They prepped and set sail as soon as they got the request from Foiniki. Mammoot isn't buying it and calls him out, struggling to get more words out before collapsing into Abiriga's arms. Abiriga, who's a big deal on the fleet, has Mammoot taken to his quarters to recover over the next few days. While Mammoot's getting patched up, he drifts off into a dream, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. All Constantinos did was trust the Doge Venedict. Lucio, maybe a little too much. Is trusting someone too much a crime now? Did something happen to Venedict that made them back off from helping Foiniki? These questions bounce around in Mammoot's head, but he can't find any answers. One thing's for sure, he's got a lot more to learn. For now, he rests and wakes up a few days later. One morning, Kiro stops by Mammoot's room to feed Iskender, who's being a total menace to him. Mammoot just lies there, wondering how the captain can stay so chill after trashing a 200-year-old alliance. Kiros doesn't have a clue either. Maybe the people of Venedict are just jerks by default. Obviously, Mammoot isn't gonna let that slide. His curiosity kicks in, and he's determined to figure out what really went down. His first move? Dig into any books he can find about Venedict's history. Lucky for him, he finds one nearby and starts reading. Kiros said he met the guy back when he was younger, but he didn't really pay much attention to what his dad was talking about with them. Now, though, it's pretty obvious they didn't care about the deal. Mammoot thanks him for the help and keeps mulling over the details of their agreement. The deal was that Foiniki would back Venedict's trade and economy, and in return, Venedict would provide military support to Foiniki. If Doge Lucio had something more than trust to offer, Mammoot was ready to figure out what that was. He spends days jotting down his thoughts in his diary until he's finally feeling good enough to walk out onto the deck on his own. Breathing in the fresh sea air, Mammoot heads straight to Brega's quarters. He thanks him for all the help and asks for a small favor when they get back to Venedict. He wants Brega to set up a private meeting between him and Doge Lucio. Brega agrees and promises to make it happen. A few days later, they finally reach the shores of Venedict. Kiros tells Mammoot he's sticking around for the long haul because he's curious to see what kind of Pasha Mammoot will turn out to be. When they dock, Abiriga gets them onto a small boat to head over to the Doge's private residence. On the way, Abiriga gives Mammoot a crash course on Venedict's history. Turns out, Venedict is kind of a no-man's land. Most of the people there ended up on the land while running from war and captivity. After years of thriving, they split themselves into 5 elemental groups: water, earth, fire, metal, and tree, so they could trace their roots. Abiriga then reveals he's the leader of Captain Brega's private militia. Mammoot acknowledges him and finally arrives at the Doge's place. Once there, he confronts the Doge and straight up asks him why he betrayed Foiniki. Before Mammoot and Kiros showed up in Venedict, Doge Lucio made sure he got the lowdown on everything that went down during the Foinikian War. After hearing the general updates, Doge Lucio got super curious about the Pasha, who's all about hating war. He invited Mammoot to hang out and have dinner with him for a few days before Mammoot headed back to his homeland. Now, with Mammoot standing right in front of him, the young politician isn't playing nice. He straight up demands an explanation from Lucio for ditching Constantinos and Foinike. Lucio listens to Mammoot's complaints and starts breaking down the relationship between Venedict and Foiniki. He points to a clause in their treaty that says Venedict's army has to send backup to Foiniki in wartime because Foiniki's been helping them financially for ages. But then Lucio, being the shady guy he is, points out that the treaty never specifically says the Venedict armada had to actually reach Foiniki. Basically, he found a loophole and used it to his advantage. Kiros loses it and calls Lucio a scammer for being so sneaky and slimy with his supposed ally. He reminds everyone that Foinike held strong for 17 days before falling to the Empire, which was plenty of time for the armada to show up. Mammoot steps in, calming Kiros down, and then asks Lucio what he thinks about the Empire taking over the Central Waters. Lucio, smug as ever, starts talking about how Venedict's famous glass is made from the crystal Foinike exports every year. He figures they'll keep exporting it no matter who's in charge, so why stress? He can just cut a new trade deal with the Empire. Mammoot fires back, calling out how nasty the Empire is and warning Lucio he might get played. But Lucio doesn't flinch. He says he never trusted Foinike in the first place and didn't ally with them out of loyalty. Mammoot then brings up Constantinos' death at the hands of Imperial soldiers. That one hits Lucio a bit, since it's news to him, but he keeps his cool and keeps talking down to Mammoot like he's a kid. Lucio explains there's no point in attacking the Empire unless they make the first move. If the Empire gets aggressive, Venedict will fight back immediately, but for now, they're staying quiet. The two of them keep arguing about diplomacy and strategy until Lucio finally sends the young Pasha off to enjoy what Venedict has to offer. As they walk through the city, Mammoot and Kiros talk about how the meeting went. Mammoot keeps his emotions in check this time. He acknowledges that, even though Lucio's a selfish jerk who uses people, the guy has some serious skills when it comes to talking his way out of things. After that, the two of them go looking for kulaks in the city. That's when Abiriga shows up and tells them there aren't any kulaks around. After catching up to the crew, he takes them to Brega's restaurant, which is run by Brega's wife. They sit down down and chat about naval stuff going on in the Central Sea and how they divide their captains to cover different parts of the continent. After listening to all the talk about his homeland, Mammoot asks why there aren't any kulaks in the city. Abiriga explains that it's because Venedict told Suleiman they didn't need spies since they already acted as spies for all nations. Back when Abiriga was younger, he impressed Suleiman with his skills, but Suleiman found himself in a tough spot when he realized no one in Venedict would betray their country or favor another nation. After hearing Abiriga's explanation, Kiros decides there's no point in sticking around in Venedict. Just as he's about to say something, Brega's wife shows up with more food. Kiros is so stunned by how beautiful she is that he just sits there quietly, staring at her. Noticing Kiros's awestruck expression, she mentions how much Abiriga means to them. She explains that Abiriga was born a slave and was passed around between owners. One day, Brega saw his potential and paid 5 times the usual price to buy him. Now, Abiriga has grown into a man of honor and sophistication. She also reveals that Abiriga is the one who gave Brega the scar on his face and has been apologizing for it ever since. Just as they're about to finish their meal, an alarm rings in the distance. Judging by the commotion, it looks like a shipwreck has happened. Abiriga gets up to check it out and finds out that a Kelowna company ship has sunk to the ocean floor. Soon after, 3 chubby merchants barge into the restaurant, demanding that Abiriga pay back the money he borrowed to invest in the company. To make things worse, Brega shows up at the wrong time and backs up their claims. He twists the story to make it look like Abiriga committed a serious crime and sentences him to exile. Later that night, Mammoot asks Abiriga why he didn't tell the captain the real reason he invested the money. Abiriga says he didn't want the captain to give him special treatment or rescue him. It would have been embarrassing for the people of Venedict. He thinks it's better this way. Shortly after, Abiriga is taken into custody. Before leaving, he thanks Mammoot for his help, hands him a map, and goes with the guards. A little while later, Mammoot and Kiros are wandering the streets of Venedict at night when they overhear the 3 merchants bragging about how easy it was to trick Abiriga and the captain. After eavesdropping long enough to confirm their guilt, Mammoot and Kiros confront them, calling them out for their lies and accusing them of setting Abiriga up. Unfortunately, there's no law in Venedict against lying without proof or letting someone walk into a bad situation on purpose, so Mammoot can't do anything about it. Frustrated but determined, Mammoot decides to help Abiriga anyway. To do that, he starts planning a military strategy. Abiriga checks in with the captain from his cell and asks Brega if it's really worth keeping up the act and fooling everyone. Brega tells him it's totally worth it because they want to see what kind of leader Mammoot is going to turn into. Meanwhile, Mammoot takes on 20 chess pros in Venedict all at once. He plays hard, wins against them, and racks up about 700 ducats in just one match. The chess pros aren't happy about losing and demand their money back, but Brega's wife shuts them down, reminding them they're still in her restaurant. They all back off and leave. When Brega gets home, his wife tells him that the boy they brought into the city has some serious guts. The next day, right before Abiriga is about to be sent off to some faraway place, Mammoot steps in. He drops the 700 ducats and buys Abiriga's freedom from Brega. Abiriga comes clean about the whole deception and apologizes. Mammoot accepts it, and Brega pitches Abiriga's skills to him. In the end, Mammoot buys Abiriga and welcomes him to the team. After they leave the city, Lucio sails over to chat with Brega about Mammoot. Brega thinks Mammoot is too young and green, but Lucio believes Mammoot has the potential to become a great leader one day because he's eager to learn and has the imagination to match his ambition. As they sail off, Kiros asks Mammoot if he's worried about Abiriga spilling their secrets to Venedict. Mammoot says it's a risk he's willing to take because they might need Venedict's help someday. Right before Venedict fades from view, the bell from Foinike rings out, and Lucio mourns the loss of his best friend, Konstantinos. Mammoot puts his time in Foinike behind him and focuses on the new journey ahead with Abiriga. After the Foinike War wrapped up, the Baltrine Empire snagged control of another prime spot on the Centro trade route. To reward Duchess Lele for her role in winning the war, the Emperor promised her half of all the taxes from the newly conquered territory. This news freaked out the nations in the Berlik-Torquier Federation. About 13 days after Foinike fell, the sultans of the Federation's 4 satellite nations called for an emergency meeting, or divan, hosted by the lead nation, Torquier Pashalu. The main topic on the table was whether to adopt a proposal Torquier Pashalu had pushed for 12 years ago. At the divan, the 4 sultans Balaban of Muzrak, Selim of Kuluch, Uzun of Beke, and Fatma of Baltaware, all respected leaders of their regions. They were asked to vote on whether or not to support Torquier Pashalu's proposal. When the results came in, everyone was stunned. The 4 of them shot down the proposal from their so-called parent nation. After the meeting, Zaganos and Suleiman talked about the growing unrest and tried to figure out how to stop a rebellion. Zaganos suggested that Torquier Pashalu should just call the Sultan's bluff and annex all 4 satellite nations to create a Torquian union. Right then, Saluja Pasha, a pacifist who's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, showed up to warn Zaganos. He said the Sultans might demand equal rights and more freedom to make their own decisions, and warned that pushing them too hard could spark a civil war down the line. Zaganos listened to his rambling for a bit but wasn't having it. Once Saluja left, Zaganos decided he wasn't going to waste time dealing with the Sultans when there was a much bigger threat, the Empire's invasion, which could happen any day now. Meanwhile, Mahmoud was traveling through the 4 satellite nations, learning about their histories. At the moment, he was in Muzrak, hanging hanging out in the town square when a weapons dealer caught his attention. Abiriga tipped him off, and they tracked the dealer to a locked-up building. After scoping it out, Abiriga led Mammoot and their colleague through a maze of tunnels to get inside. They sneaked through the tunnels and eventually reached the inner chambers. There, they had to fight off a guard before Mammoot could introduce himself. Not long after, two important figures showed up. One of them introduced himself as Bayezid, brother of Balaban, the local sultan. The woman with him was Princess Aishi, daughter of Fatma, the sultan of Balta. Bayezid also revealed that he was the kulak of the region, which surprised Mammoot, who asked why a sultan's brother would take on such a role. Bayezid just shrugged it off, saying that's how things were. Aishi, on the other hand, started throwing shade at Mammoot, trying to mess with his head. But Mammoot stayed cool and kept pressing Bayezid for answers about why he was hiding out in this building. Bayezid explained what went down at the recent divan, which shocked Mammoot. Mammoot then asked for a meeting with Bayezid's brother, but Bayezid warned him to be careful, his brother could be unpredictable and dangerous. Even so, Mammoot wasn't about to back down. Bayezid eventually told him where to find his brother, curious to see what Mammoot might learn from the encounter. Mammoot and his crew finally roll up to Balaban's camp and see the legendary Yenicheri soldiers. Mammoot's jaw practically hits the floor when he sees how many troops Balaban has pulled together, but he plays it cool and asks to meet with the Sultan anyway. Meanwhile, Bayezid catches wind of his brother's massive army that's clearly coming for him next. It's a no-brainer, so he tells his guys to start prepping to ditch the building before Balaban shows up and smokes them out. While that's going down, Mammoot steps into Balaban's tent, shows some respect, and then asks why Balaban ditched the Berlik-Torquier alliance. From what Mammoot remembers, this temporary team-up is their best shot at surviving if a big dog like the Empire decides to invade. Balaban listens to Mammoot's whole pitch, then basically tells him to shove it. He's done letting his nation treat his people like garbage. If they can't give his nation equal rights, they can deal with the Empire on their own. Mammoot asks if Balaban is really trying to spark a civil war, and Balaban says nah, he's just gonna crush anyone who stands against him. As for his brother Bayezid, who's holed up in the water shrine, Balaban says he's got plans to deal with him soon. Before wrapping up, Balaban asks Mammoot how he feels about getting demoted by Torquier. Balaban figures Mammoot should be pissed at them for wasting his potential, but Mammoot shrugs it off. He admits he was young and clueless back then, so he probably deserved it. No matter what, he still loves his homeland, even if they stab him in the back. At that, Balaban makes up his mind. He's never bowing to Torquier's demands, period. And as for Bayezid, he's a disgrace, and Balaban won't stop until he takes down his cowardly brother. When they roll up to the shrine, Balaban calls out Bayezid and Aishi, labeling them as traitors and enemies of the state. Mammoot asks why Balaban thinks Aishi is a traitor, and Balaban spills the tea. She tried to pull off a coup against her mom, but it flopped. Kiros leans over to Mammoot and whispers that they should have bailed while they were wasting Balaban's time. When the moment's right, Balaban sets the whole water shrine on fire. Inside, Bayezid and Aishi kick on some water-draining mechanism to make their escape. After pulling this shady move, Balaban formally invites Mammoot back to his quarters. Meanwhile, Suleiman gets a letter from Mahmoud spilling all the details about what went down in the city. When Zaganos hears about Bayezid's recent death, he starts cooking up a plan for the next divan meeting. He suggests the 13 Pashas use a throwaway pawn to take down the 4 Sultanate stratocracies. That way, even if the assassin gets busted, it won't lead back to Torquia Pashalu. Saluja jumps up to argue, calling the plan cowardly and dumb. But Zaganos claps back, reminding everyone there's no time to waste, they've got to get ready for the Empire. Saluja suggests meeting the demands of the 4 nations to smooth things over, but Zaganos isn't buying it. Saluja keeps ranting until Zaganos shuts him down, saying the satellite nations don't give a damn about the Federation anymore. Zaganos promises that if the Pashas let him handle it, he'll make sure the job gets done. That night, Zaganos gets the green light to plan the coup. He picks Mammoot, a low-ranking soldier who's easy to sacrifice, to pull it off and take down all 4 sultans before it's too late. He shares the plan with Suleiman and explains his reasoning. Suleiman gets the gist of the political move and heads off to Muzrak. Meanwhile, Mammoot keeps checking out Balaban's palace. His guys, Kiros and Abariga, get distracted by the fancy fountain and wander off to take a closer look. Later, when night falls, the 3 of them sneak out of the palace, quietly taking out a bunch of guards on their way to the gates. Eleanor spots Balaban leaving his quarters and asks why he hasn't dealt with Mammoot yet. Balaban brushes her off, saying not to sweat it because he's got plans for the kid. While Mammoot and his crew sneak out through the sewers disguised as Yenicheri soldiers, Balaban and his men discover the missing guards and raise the alarm. Mammoot thinks about trying to talk things out with Balaban, but they all know it's way too late for that. Instead, they slip into the next Yenicheri roll call, which Balaban is leading, and try to stay under the radar. Balaban starts the roll call, checking off a few soldiers until he gets to Mammoot and Kiros, but not Abirigan calls them out. When he catches Mammoot, Balaban lets him know how disappointed he is, and threatens to burn his face to a crisp. Right then, the fountain nearby goes haywire, and Abiriga uses the water to put out the torches. He takes advantage of the chaos to take down all the guards in the courtyard, including Balaban, and helps his crew escape back into the sewers. Mammoot and the others keep moving through the sewers until they finally run into Eleanor and Rod Orm at the other end. Eleanor kicks off the convo by telling Mammoot she's been waiting to see him for a while. Mammoot and his crew figure out that the Empire's minister, Louis, has been pulling strings behind the shady moves of the four stratocracies. After hearing Mammoot's take on it, Eleanor decides letting him live would be a mistake. Mammoot's ready to throw down and promises no mercy for her fancy goons. Eleanor drops the act, pulls out her long, flexible sword, and the fight begins. Mammoot, his crew, and his eagle, Iskender, team up to not only take Eleanor's sword but also shut down the other assassins. With his blade at Eleanor's neck, Mammoot glares at her skinny, smug self and warns her not to mess with him again. He's beaten her twice now, there won't be a third time because next time, he'll take her out for good. Eleanor stalls by begging for her life, but when Mammoot starts trash-talking her boss Louis, she snaps back at him. Eventually, Balaban and his Yanicheris roll in to capture Balaban. While Mammoot's distracted, Eleanor slips free and barely escapes with her life. Mammoot and his crew hide out, waiting for a miracle. When it seems like all hope is gone, Suleiman and the clueless duo, Bayezid and Aishi, show up to save them. Mammoot joins them, and they manage to escape Balaban's grip. During their debrief, Mammoot tells Suleiman that Balaban is a stubborn pain in the ass who won't back down. As long as Balaban stays the Sultan of Muzrak, the Brillik Torki Federation is a no-go. After hearing Mammoot out, Suleiman fills him in on the Divan's plan to make Mammoot the leader of an anti-Sultan rebellion. If Mammoot agrees, he'll have to overthrow all four sultans within a tight deadline. Hiro smells something fishy and calls them out for trying to use Mammoot as a scapegoat for their shady scheme. Mammoot gets up and asks Bayezid and Aishi if they're on board with the plan. They agree, and Mammoot finally accepts the Divan's orders. Meanwhile, back in Torquay, Saluja Pasha confronts Zaganos about his decision to overthrow the sultans. Zaganos ignores him at first, but eventually loses patience and calls Saluja out for being an idealistic idiot instead of a realist. Saluja rides off, deciding to handle things his own way. The next morning, Mahmut and his new crew head to another sultanate to kick off their mission. On the way, Mahmut names Bayezid and Aishi as pro-Torquay leaders of Muzrak and Balta. For now, the plan hinges on finding 2 more leaders for Buchak and Kuluch. Mahmut racks his brain to figure out candidates to step in after the current sultans are taken down. Suleiman keeps riding until they reach Buchak's capital. There, they spot wanted posters with their faces plastered all over the city walls. Unable to walk in openly, Suleiman disguises himself and Mahmut as a married couple to get inside. Luckily, the plan works, and they make it into the capital. As they wander through the city, Suleiman explains a business deal that will fall apart if the Brillik Torquay splits from Mahmut. By night, Zaganos reads a message from Suleiman to stay updated on their progress. Around that time, Suleiman takes Mahmut and the crew to check out the new road the Buchak engineers are working on. This road is supposed to connect the Empire and Buchak and act as a trade hub between the two. If they finish the road, Buchak can finally sell their gems for way more cash than they're getting now. When Mahmut hears this, it hits him the Empire is trying to buy Buchak with money. And if the road gets done before they take out the 4 current sultans, the Brillik Torquay could be toast. To stop this, Mahmut splits the group in 2. One team will handle Buchak, while the other deals with the Sultan in Kuluch. Aisha volunteers to head to Kuluch since she's familiar with the Sultan there. Hearing this, Mahmut tells Suleiman and Bayezid to find a leader for Buchak while the rest of them head to Kuluch. By the next morning, they roll into Kuluch and meet Aishi's future husband, Prenz Orhan. Turns out, Orhan's kind of a wimp-like. Seriously, this dude's got the guts of a scared little kid. His wife even has to step in to calm him down. Anyway, Mahmut and the squad crash at Orhan's villa, where he serves them fresh fruit. Aishi doesn't waste time and straight up asks Orhan to arrange a meeting with his dad. Orhan warns her it's risky since even he barely remembers what his dad looks like. Selim's always wearing a mask, but Aishi doesn't care about any of that. Eventually, they score a meeting with Selim. Mahmut tells his crew not to kill Selim if they get the chance they need to figure out why he's always hiding behind that mask. Soon, they meet the Sultan, who greets them and keeps it real. Selim and Aishi trade some sarcastic jabs, with Aishi reminding him how weak his nation is compared to the other sultanates. Selim fires back, saying he's tight with Balaban and doesn't have any beef with him. Then, out of nowhere, Selim calls in his warriors, who point their swords at Mahmut and his crew. To keep things from getting bloody, Mahmut diffuses the situation but starts suspecting something's off about Selim's behavior. Maybe agents from the Empire are keeping tabs on him. Anyway, Selim has his men lock Mahmut and the gang in the 9th tower until Balaban shows up. Right after they're thrown in, the agents reveal themselves, confirming Mahmut's suspicions. While Orhan cries over his dad's betrayal, Abiriga finds a weak spot in the tower and tips off Mahmut. Just then, a secret door swings open, and Selim shows his real face. He apologizes for acting weird earlier, admitting that betraying the Brillik Torquay was a tough pill to swallow. He's now on board with whatever Mahmut's planning and explains his situation. His nation is tiny, with no military or economic power, so there's not much he can do against the other 3 sultanates. Aishi comes up with a sneaky new plan that might help their takeover succeed. If Selim can set up a wedding between herself and the prince, they can gather all the sultans in one place and take them out at once. If the sultans skip the wedding, they'll just go ahead with the marriage and cause problems for them later. Selim's on board with the plan, so he starts getting things rolling the very next day. After sending out the invites the following morning, Mammoot and Abariga chat about the chances of Kuluch cutting a deal behind their backs to get an upper hand. Mammoot keeps an open mind and asks Aisha if she's okay with marrying someone she doesn't love. Aisha sees how sharp Mammoot is and tells him she's been trained to handle arranged marriages without breaking a sweat. Plus, the guy she likes might not even like her back, so she figures there's no point stressing about it. Meanwhile, miles away, Suleiman and Bayezid are on the run after getting spotted by Buchak's soldiers. Around the same time, Bayolu Ismail, one of Uzun's 45 sons, shows up just in time and brings his dad treasures from far-off lands. After the pleasantries, he notices some shady characters causing trouble and asks his dad for permission to capture and deal with them before things get out of hand. Uzun gives him the green light, and Ismail hires the Orquesta mercenary crew to track down Suleiman and Bayezid. Once they're caught, Ismail has a sit-down with them, letting them know he's on the same page and would rather be under the protection of the Burlik Torquier. Suleiman agrees with the plan and waits for Ismail to take the next step. Ismail asks what Torquier Pashalu is willing to bring to the table to make their rebellion a success. Suleiman lists a few weak resources and soldiers, which doesn't impress Ismail. They'll need way more than 5,000 men from Kuluch to take on the 23,000 soldiers from the other three sultanates. Bayazid stops him from jumping to conclusions and tells Ismail to follow him so he can show him a secret he's been keeping. Ismail trusts him and tags along, eventually discovering Bayazid's hidden weapon, the Shark Bow 70, 7 of them, no less. With that, Ismail seals the deal to rebel against his father alongside Bayazid. Before diving back into the main story, we get a flashback showing how Bayazid and Aishi fell for each other. From the looks of it, Aishi's head over heels for Bayazid. Back in the day, Balaban was hanging out with them in the forest when he realized how sharp Bayazid was. That's when he made a deal with Bayazid to always have his back and use his smarts to help make Muzrak great again. Fast forward to now, all three of them are sitting around, looking all serious, lost in thought as they remember those good times. A few days later, a divan meeting is called with the pashas of Torki Pashalu to talk about Mammoot's plan to overthrow the current sultans of the 4 satellite nations. Some war-hungry folks were all for it, but others, including some clueless idiots, were against it. Saluja, the king of all dumbasses, stands up and asks the head pasha to let him represent Torkiye Pashalu at the wedding. The head pasha gives him the green light to head to Kuluch, and Saluja is all thankful about it. As they leave the capital, Zaganos watches them go, fully aware that Buyuk Pasha, the head pasha, basically sent them on a suicide mission. Not that it matters much, Saluja kind of had it coming. Next, we see Mammoot and his crew meeting up with Bayolu Ismail in Akayip, the capital of Kuluch, to go over his wedding plan. Ismail's cool with the plan but suggests letting the wedding happen without any assassinations. Then, once Orhan becomes sultan, they can use Kuluch's soldiers to take down the other 3 nations. Mammoot shoots down the idea, thinking a civil war would just tear people apart. Ismail presses him, asking how he plans to make people overlook an assassination, and Mammoot tells him to meet him at the Circle Plaza in 3 nights. 3 nights later, Ismail and the other Torquians show up at the Circle Plaza for a stage play. The play paints the current sultans as evil demons working with the empire. It goes on for a while before finally wrapping up. Afterward, Mammoot and Ismail see the plan in action. Mammoot thanks Shara and her crew for helping him pull it off, and asks them to keep performing the play for 6 more months if anything happens to him. Shara tells him to quit being dramatic and just focus on surviving the year. Later that night, Mammoot talks to Kiros, explaining that they'll need the people's support if things go sideways. Meanwhile, Abiriga chats with Aishi about what might happen if the sultans blow off her wedding invite. If that happens, Orhan will become sultan and force the other nations to fall in line with military power. Aishi feels proud but also thinks cocky Balaban won't just sit back and let it slide. Speaking of Balaban, he's shown talking to Saluja, the fool who thinks he's some kind of saint. Saluja spills the beans, telling Balaban that the Divan suspects he's been making deals with the empire to take them down. Balaban, playing it cool, pats Saluja on the shoulder and thanks him for snitching about the Divan's plans. For now, Balaban plans to bring 10 Yenicheris with him to the wedding. Saluja, clueless as ever, thanks him for being such a nice guy and heads off to his room. Later that night, Balaban thinks back to the memory of his dad's death. Turns out, his dad was used as a pawn in one of Torquier's political games. This made Balaban furious with the Burlik Torquier, and he was dead set on getting revenge. Fired up, he orders his men to let the sultans of Buchak and Balta know to get their armies ready so they can march to Kuluch and crush them with everything they've got. Meanwhile, word about Saluja's betrayal reaches the Divan. Buyuk Pasha sees this as a golden opportunity. Instead of calling Saluja out for being a fool, Buyuk decides to stab Balaban in the back. While Balaban's off chasing ghosts in Kuluch, Buyuk plans to attack his unguarded homeland. As usual, Zaganos jumps in and backs Buyuk. Against all odds, Buyuk hands Zaganos control of the armies to get things rolling. At the same time, Balaban meets up with Fatma and rides in her carriage as they talk about the upcoming war. Over on Mammoot's side, he and his crew are busy planning their positions for the wedding. They want everything to go smoothly when it's time to take out all the sultans. Meanwhile, Aishi tries on her wedding dress and complains about how hard it is to handle a sword in such a heavy, fancy gown. Bayazit shows up and offers to help her train outside, and she's all for it. During their private training session, Aishi starts reminiscing about the good times she shared with Bayazit. After they're done, they sit and watch the sunset, talking about their biggest dreams. During the chat, Aishi realizes Bayazit felt the same way she did. They both thought they'd end up marrying each other, but now, that's not gonna happen. Poor Orhan overhears the whole thing. The guy's heart shatters, and he ends up crying alone in a dark hallway. Selim finds his son bawling his eyes out on the stairs and sits him down for a talk. He tells Orhan to quit being a wimp and step up his game if he wants to be the kind of man Aishi can fall for. Orhan takes his dad's words to heart and promises to change. As the wedding prep continues, Aishi calls Mammoot to remind him why the Torkian government picked him for this mission. Mammoot reassures her that he knows exactly what's at stake and says he's ready to face it. Bayazit, watching this, gets a little jealous of Mammoot's determination. It takes him back to the day he found out his brother had betrayed the Torkian alliance. Bayazit wasn't just heartbroken, he was crushed that his brother chose the wrong path. If it comes down to it, Bayazit's ready to do whatever it takes to save Muzrak, even if it means taking him out. The next day arrives in the blink of an eye, and Kulich is buzzing with excitement for the festivities. Just as the ceremony is about to kick off, Mammoot gets a message from Zaganos warning him about an army heading their way. Mammoot looks out and sees 20,000 soldiers closing in on Kulich. Wasting no time, he sends Kiros to evacuate the citizens, while Abariga and Suleiman rush to protect Sultan Selim from the Empire's agents. Once everyone's got their orders, Mammoot gets back to fine-tuning his assassination plan. The Sultan rolls up into his son's room, ready to take him out and stick his head on a spike. Orhan's begging his dad to chill, but Aishi pulls out her sword and steps up to the soldiers. Meanwhile, Ismail, Bayazit, and the crew gear up for a fight as they head to the palace's military quarters. Aishi and her fiancé eventually get outnumbered, and Orhan has no choice but to hold a knife to his dad's throat to stop the guards from killing his girl. Elsewhere, Abariga and Suleiman track down and take out some Empire agents. As they make their way to Selim's room, Orhan's hit with another curveball. His dad asks if he's ready to leave their small nation to fight Balaban, knowing it could mean total destruction. Orhan, looking like the biggest clown of the century, admits he doesn't know jack about war or politics like his dad does. The Sultan's over it at this point. He shoves Orhan aside and goes straight for Aishi. But before he can get to her, Orhan gets up and stabs his dad in the back. Selim, realizing what just went down, accepts his son's choice and tells him to stay strong because he's about to be the new Sultan. Right then, Abiriga and Suleiman walk in and see Selim in Orhan's arms. Meanwhile, Mammoot's struggling to keep Kuluch's army of 5,000 in line. The cocky captain refuses to move his men without hearing from the Sultan first, even though a war is about to hit them hard. Just when it looks like they're about to screw everything up, Orhan finally grows a pair and takes charge like a boss. He shows them his dad's mask, making it clear he's taken him out, and orders the captain to follow Mahmoud's lead. The captain bows down to the new Sultan, and Mahmoud gets what he needs. To figure out what caused the beef between Balaban and Bayazit, there's a flashback showing how it all went down. Turns out, Bayazit's love for his brother went south when he caught Balaban cutting a deal with Louis, that Empire jerk. Before Bayazit even showed up at his brother's palace, Louis was already there, working his angle. He buttered up the Sultan of Muzrak, gave his fake condolences for the Empire, taking the Sultan's dad out, and then whipped out this fancy map he'd drawn on papyrus. Balaban checked it out and noticed it wasn't like any map he'd ever seen. Louis told him to take a closer look, saying it was the future map of Rumiliana. Basically, if Louis's plan worked, Muzrak would finally get its independence, which was Balaban's dream. When Bayazit finally arrived, he saw Balaban grinning at the map, and just from that look, he knew his brother was about to stab him in the back. Wanting to stay on the safe side, Bayazit secretly met with Zaganos and asked to be made a kulak officer for Muzrak. Zaganos grilled him for a bit to figure out what he was really after, but in the end, he gave Bayazit the position and let him move forward as Muzrak's new kulak. By August, 31 of the 75th year of Torkia's calendar, Balaban and two other sultans had their armies ready to surround Kuluch. Meanwhile, Orhan and his troops, gearing up for a siege, turned to Mahmoud for advice, but Mahmoud told them to ditch the siege prep and try something new. He showed them a message from the divan, telling them to act as decoys to distract the three nations while Zaganos and his crew swooped in to take out the other cities. Mahmoud wasn't about to let the people of Kuluch be sacrificed, just so Zaganos and the others could have an easy win. Still, their enemies outnumbered them 4-1. As Ismail and Bayazit joined their impromptu war meeting, Mahmoud got word from Suleiman Balaban about Ismail's hidden men armed with shark yays, bows. Mammoot realized that brothers might have to fight each other, and if it came to that, they had to make sure they were on the winning side no matter what. Bayezid straight up told Mammoot it was fine to kill Balaban because he'd already lost all respect for his backstabbing brother. Mammoot made sure everyone was on the same page before putting his plan into action. When the time came, they headed to the front lines, ready to throw down and bring home the win. Balaban, meanwhile, had a moment to reflect on the time he dealt with Saluja, the idiot whose idealistic ideas got him into trouble. Balaban thanked him for the heads up that saved him from getting killed by Mammoot, but as payback for being so dumb, Balaban killed him anyway. Snapping back to the present with the sounds of battle ringing out, Balaban scanned the field and noticed how small Mammoot's army was. He searched for Bayezid, and, when he spotted him, decided that wiping out everyone with his 20 men wasn't honorable enough. Instead, he took only 5 soldiers to match Mammoot's numbers, and charged into battle. Seeing what Balaban was up to, Mammoot thanked Bayezid for sticking with them to the end, and sent Ismail off to hide in their pre-planned spot. With that handled, Mammoot got his men into formation and realized Balaban was commanding all 23 troops. If he wants to win the war, he's got to take down Balaban and make the rest of his army useless. So, he kicks things off with a super basic battle plan, but Balaban catches on fast. Seeing how weak and predictable the setup is, Balaban goes all in, charging straight at Mammoot's army. Mammoot tries to throw him off with tree branches strapped to horses, hoping to distract him, but nope, that doesn't even faze Balaban. He keeps chasing Mammoot, thinking he's got this in the bag. Once Balaban's close enough, Mammoot orders his guys on horseback to stir up a massive dust cloud with the tree branches. The dust blinds Balaban and his troops, making it hard for them to see what's going on. This works pretty well because Balaban's army ends up separated from the other 18,000 men. When they're far enough apart, this cocky captain from earlier breaks off from the main group. The 18,000 try to follow, but they get ambushed by spear-wielding fighters hiding in the galleys. Orhan sees the dust cloud and knows it's time to kick off the next phase of the plan. He signals his men to form a reverse bow formation, and they get it done in no time. Meanwhile, the rest of the Kuluch army pretends to retreat, giving Mammoot's crew the chance to catch up and surround Balaban's troops. With the dust cloud still hanging around, Uzun asks Fatma if they should send reinforcements, but Fatma knows her brother and doesn't want to mess with his honor. Mammoot eventually breaks through Balaban's Yenikaris, wiping out most of them. By the time Balaban realizes what's happening, it's too late. Over half of his elite Yenikaris are dead. When the dust finally settles, Mammoot steps up and tells Balaban to surrender while he still can, or he'll die by Mammoot's sword. But Balaban's too proud to back down. Instead, he rallies the rest of his Yenicharis, firing them up to keep fighting for their country. It works for a bit, and they start chasing the enemy again. Heroes and some of Kuluch's men retreat into nearby ravines, leading Balaban straight into a trap set by Ismail. Balaban, too blinded by his ego, follows them without a clue about what's waiting for him. Bayazit and Ismail get their shark yay weapons ready and start firing at Balaban's men as they enter the ravine. After the first attack, Ismail's crew blocks off Balaban's escape routes with giant boulders at both ends. Then, they reload and get ready for another round of fire. In the meantime, Ismail's archers rain arrows down on Balaban's troops to soften them up for what's next. Balaban orders his men into a turtle formation to shield them from the arrows as they try to find a way out. But as they move, Balaban starts realizing how badly he underestimated Mammoot. Before he can do anything about it, Bayezid and his crew fire another round, taking out most of his men. After surviving the second wave, Balaban spots some shark yay shells on the ground and figures out that Bayezid is behind the attack. He's hit with a mix of betrayal and regret, thinking his own brother hates him that much. Balaban tells his men to escape the trap before Bayezid fires again, but it's too late. Bayezid launches a third attack, this time hitting Balaban twice, once in the chest and, yeah, probably in the nuts. Even with those injuries, Balaban, like the absolute tank he is, charges at Bayezid, still trying to kill him. He demands to know why Bayezid betrayed him. Bayezid tells him it's because he's not fit to be sultan. He says Balaban got too cocky when Louis, that backstabbing jerk from the empire, gave him what he wanted. Bayezid admits he saw this coming because Balaban's too stubborn and emotional. Balaban drops his knife and asks Bayezid if he remembers when he promised to love him forever. Bayezid holds his dying brother and tells him he's loved him since they were kids. As the sun sets, Balaban dies on the battlefield, leaving the sultan's title to his brother, Bayezid. Back on the battlefield, Uzun, the fat jerk, gets fed up waiting for Balaban's signal to attack. He gathers his troops and gears up for a final blow against Orhan's forces. Abiriga and Orhan know what Uzun's planning, but they stay calm and wait for Mammoot to bring proof that Balaban's been taken out. If Mammoot can pull it off, the war's over. Meanwhile, Abiriga tries to keep Orhan from losing his cool and doing something dumb, but it's tough since Orhan keeps losing a ton of men with every attack. Just when things seem hopeless, Princess Aishi rides out of the castle with the castle guards. Orhan watches from a distance and realizes she's about to lead the guards who aren't even trained for real combatento battle against Uzun's troops. Aishi doesn't care though. She uses the guards to buy Mammoot and Bayezid more time to finish their mission. Uzun catches on to her plan and, pissed off at her bold move, sends his men to take her out. Orhan yells out, praying for his future wife's safety, when suddenly Iskender shows up out of nowhere and saves saves her from being killed. Not long after, Mammoot arrives with Balaban's head, proving he's dead. Uzun immediately retreats, running off like the coward he is. Dude's terrified now that the one guy who gave him the guts to fight is gone. Uzun heads back to his castle to figure out his next move with the Empire. Meanwhile, Fatma hears about the crazy turn of events and starts planning her escape before she's caught. As night falls, Mahmoud and his crew are pumped to see Uzun retreating. Instead of chasing him, they let him go back the way he came. Uzun takes his clueless mercenaries through the ravines again, not realizing Bayezid and Ismail, one of his sons, are waiting for him. The two lie in wait until Uzun and his worn-out soldiers are deep in the ravines. When the time's right, they spook the soldiers with a surprise attack. The soldiers panic and scatter, leaving Uzun behind. Before Ismail goes for the kill, Bayezid asks if he's ready to take out his own father. Ismail doesn't hesitate, saying his dad's nothing but a coward and a greedy lowlife. Plus, if he kills his dad now, no one can challenge his claim to the throne. Once the coast is clear, Ismail finishes the job and takes his father out faster than you can blink. Elsewhere, Mahmoud and his forces trap Fatma and her remaining warriors in another part of the ravines. Scared out of their minds, they slip up and hand their sultan over to Mahmoud. He takes Fatma back to the castle and locks her up. Over dinner, Mahmoud and his new allies talk about how to punish her. They're worried that if they kill her outright, the boy who's supposed to inherit the throne might rebel and ruin their plans. Kiros asks Aishi why Fatma brought the kid to the battlefield in the first place, and Aishi explains that he was safer with his mom than left alone in the palace. She then shares a story about how her mother, Sultan Fatma, became ruler after her father's death. Fatma was supposed to hold the throne until the boy was old enough to take over. Some relatives, like her uncle Qasim, had issues with this, but Balaban took him out before he could cause trouble. After hearing all this, Orhan stands up and tries to defend Fatma, but Aishi, her daughter, insists they can't let her off the hook. After dinner, Mahmoud heads back to Fatma and drops the bombshell she's set to be executed at sundown with a painless poison. Fatma takes the news like a champ and calmly asks if her son, Kemal, is going down with her. Shockingly, Mahmoud says no. Turns out Kemal is supposed to inherit Balta's throne someday. In the meantime, Aishi will be running the show until Kemal turns 15 and can take over. Fatma feels a little better hearing this. But Kemal, seeing the sadness on his mom's face, rushes to Mahmoud, pleading for mercy. He begs Mahmoud to spare Fatma, saying she hasn't done anything wrong. Then he turns to Aisha, asking if she can step in and help. But Aisha, clearly over her little brother's dramatics, tells him there's nothing she can do to change the decision. Furious, Kemal storms back to his mom and vows to avenge her if they go through with the plan. At sunrise, Mahmoud hands Fatma a drink, and she takes a sip, ready to face her end. But as the sun fully rises, Mahmoud suddenly calls off the execution and spares her life. Ismail and Bayezid confront Mahmoud, demanding to know why he changed his mind. Mahmoud explains that if Kemal loses his mom, he'll never forgive them, and all their efforts will be for nothing. To keep Fatma safe, Mahmoud promises to set her up in a house on the city's outskirts, where she can live out her days in peace. Right then, Suleiman steps up and asks Mahmoud how he plans to deal with the divan if they push back on his decision. Mahmoud, not giving a damn, says it's his call, his win, and he'll handle the new sultans however he sees fit. From that moment, Mahmoud's reputation as a legend begins to grow. A few hours later, Orhan throws a fit, crying like a spoiled kid as he says goodbye to his fiancée, Aishi. Aishi, clearly unimpressed, tells him to pull himself together and act like a man if he wants her to respect him enough to marry him. Orhan finally gets it together and lets her be. That afternoon, word of the successful coup reaches Zaganos and the rest of the crew, who were ready to spill innocent blood to hold on to their power. The new sultans roll into Torquay's capital to pay their respects and make their presence known. Meanwhile, Louis couldn't care less about the coup as long as it doesn't mess with the empire. He meets with the emperor and pushes him to get the troops ready for an invasion of Torquay. On the flip side, Abiriga and Kiros start talking about getting Mammoot reinstated as Pasha at the next divan meeting, feeling like he's done enough good to earn it. At the next council meeting, Mammoot gets noticed by Buyuk himself, who later asks if he wants his Pasha title back. Mammoot picks up on the vibe and realizes the Pashas are testing his loyalty to Torquay. Before he answers, he remembers a conversation with Ismail from back in the day when he was complaining about pointless bloodshed and stuff. Ismail told him soldiers will gladly die for a good cause, and whether Mammoot likes it or not, they'd be happy to see their dreams come true. The new sultans also promised to bust their butts to make Mammoot's vision a reality. With all that in mind, Mammoot takes back his title. That afternoon at the council, some poor guy starts whining about losing 7,000 men in the civil war and freaking out about what to do if the empire attacks. Mammoot steps up with a bold idea hit, the empire first. Even Zaganos was caught off guard by that. Mammoot tells everyone to believe in themselves and points out a few things they've got that the empire doesn't, which even convinces someone like Halil Pasha. He smooth talks the room into letting him become the first minister of foreign affairs. Later that night, Mahmoud and Zaganos have an awkward meetup in the castle courtyard. Mahmoud gets Zaganos' attention, and thanks him for picking him and Suleiman to be key players in his spy network. Mammoot tries to give the Pyramus back, but Zaganos doesn't take them. Instead, he tells Mammoot to make everyone proud. Mammoot thanks him again and heads off to meet up with his crew so they can keep doing what needs to be done. On their next trip, Mammoot and his crew roll into a famous merchant city that's got ties to the east. They meet up with one of the city's top dogs, Lord Ramanov Ram for short, to pitch an idea. Mammoot wants Ram's help to let Torki Pashalu trade with the eastern part of the continent, but Ram isn't feeling it. He shuts Mammoot down, saying they can't risk messing up their reputation with other nations just to help Torkie. Then, Ram kicks Mammoot out of his castle and goes about his business like nothing happened. On their way back, Mammoot and his crew stumble across some drama. A girl named Hanum Nikki is causing a scene after a trade deal went sideways. Turns out, she wanted her goods back because of some personal reasons. This dude, Idris, who used to work for her dad, bailed on her family's company to join the competition right after her dad passed away. He didn't think Hanum was cut out to run the business. Hanum's pissed and lets Idris have it, but Idris fires back with some seriously dumb comments, saying she's nothing compared to her dad and blaming her dad for dying in the first place. That's the last straw for Hanum. As Idris turns to leave, she snaps and beats the crap out of him before one of his guards steps in to stop her. Idris gets up, talks more trash about her dad, and leaves Hanum standing there in tears. That night, Hanum's wandering the streets with nowhere to go and no business to run. She's just aimlessly walking around, looking like a mess. She cries her eyes out until she decides to give up on everything. Just as she's about to toss her dad's necklace, Mammoot shows up with a new plan. Hanum gets a little aggressive, but Abariga calms her down. Mammoot shows her some stunning Torkian jewelry and promises her a fresh start if she's willing to ditch her useless city and join his crew. Hanum doesn't even hesitate, sees in. She listens to Mammoot's plan and agrees to roll with them to make it happen. The next day, Mammoot, Kiros, and Abariga dress up as women and team up with Hanum to sell their jewelry on the city streets. Kiros is totally grossed out by his disguise, but Idris and the other jerks are stunned to see Hanum back on her feet after hitting rock bottom the day before. For Hanum, this is a turning point. She's done with her old life and ready for something new. That night, Mammoot asks Hanum if they can break into the eastern marketplace like the city's top 3 merchants. Hanum says it's going to be tough since those guys have been making life hard for other merchants for years. When Mammoot explains he wants to deal with Chinili because they're rich and easy for the Empire to notice, Hanum suddenly remembers a guy from Chinili who buys weird stuff from Rumuriana for the Chinili Emperor. The next day, Mammoot and his crew, including Hanum, roll up to this guy's fancy villa and find him, well, totally naked. Hanum introduces him as Wang Yishin from Chinili, and they all settle in his dining room to sip some tea and chat. Mammoot listens to Wang's backstory, trying to get a feel for the kind of guy he's dealing with. Once he's got the info he needs, Mammoot pulls out this fancy Venedition glass cup and asks Wang if he can hook him up with 10,000 of these to ship to Chinili. Wang hears him out but straight up says no and almost ends the meeting. Mammoot stops him in his tracks, promising to bring peace to Chinili if Wang can make it happen. Seeing Mammoot's determination, Wang has a light bulb moment. He remembers the Chinili Emperor's son's birthday is coming up and flips the script, offering to buy 400,000 boxes of Venedition glass from the Nikki caravan instead. They shake on it and everyone goes on their way. That evening, Wang spills the tea to his wife while they're chilling on the balcony. He explains how the Baltrine Empire is super aggressive and says he'd rather deal with a clever soldier from Torkie than those Empire jerks. A few days later, Mammoot and his crew get the shipment of Venedition glass and start loading it onto caravans for distribution. Ram asks Wang what's up with all the glass, and Wang says it's for the prince's birthday. Ram grins and gives him the green light to keep at it, but then they hit a snag. Turns out the cushions for the boxes didn't show up on time. That night, the crew talks about the cushion problem, but Mammoot tells them to chill, saying it's already being handled. Sure enough, a few days later, Venedict ships out 200,000 boxes of cushion stocks to the merchant cities. Brega oversees the whole thing, and Doge Lucio gives him a big thank you. To mess with the Empire's plans even more, Brega heads to Theros and offers to buy their wheat at 5 times the usual price. The greedy ruler of Theros jumps at the deal, totally ignoring his agreement with the Empire. When Louis, the Empire's guy, finds out, he's fuming. The Duchess rubs salt in the wound by calling him useless, but Louis doesn't even care. Instead, he plots to steal the wheat by stationing a fleet in Foinike to ambush the Theros ships. Lele suggests they force other nations to join the Empire so they won't have to deal with Torkie anymore. Meanwhile, the Empire's troops in Foinike get orders to act, but are too lazy to move at first. Eventually, they get their act together and attack the Venedition fleet coming from Theros. Brega tries to avoid a fight, and the Empire's fleet captain feels the same, but some hot-headed rookie starts a battle anyway. The fight drags on for days, but in the end, Venedict's navy wins and captures Ryan Law, an old, worn-out guy from Venedict. Mammoot hears about all this and finally reveals his big plan to play Venedict and the Empire against each other. Since Venedict is now his ally, he speeds things up by making them indirectly betray the Empire. Abariga is blown away by Mammoot's cleverness and tells him so. Mammoot thanks Hanum for her role in pulling it off. She accepts his thanks and asks to join his crew to travel the world with them. Mammoot happily welcomes her aboard for their next adventure to stop the war. Around October 24, in the 75th year of the Torkian calendar, the Empire signed a deal with Venedict, agreeing they could sail through Venedict's waters with wheat they'd they'd bought from Theros. But just 3 days later, a couple of Empire ships carrying wheat to Phoenike got wrecked by pirates in Venedict's waters. Venedict didn't lift a finger to help and basically left the Empire hanging. Lele, the Duchess, was on one of the ships that got hit, and she was seriously pissed that Venedict's forces didn't do squat. Lucio, the Doge of Venedict, seemed to think this was Venedict's way of pushing the Empire out, since the Empire's aggressive tactics weren't exactly winning over Centro's queen. Lucio also figured Mammoot had a hand in this mess. He suspected Mammoot orchestrated the whole thing to push Venedict into backing out of their treaty with the Empire. Both Brega and Lucio couldn't help but admire Mammoot's guts and cleverness for pulling it off. Meanwhile, Mammoot was out shopping for fur coats at a small store, getting ready for the freezing cold up north. By November 7, Mammoot and his crew headed to Regatul Urado, the only nation in the northern region that had stayed closed off to the world for 400 years with zero trade ties. After braving the brutal winter, they finally reached the gates, where they were put through some intense checks before being let in. Mammoot noticed how harshly the locals were treated, and went through even stricter inspections before getting access to the inner part of the nation. Even then, Mammoot had to wait alone for a bit, while his meeting with the minister was double-checked. After another round of security, Mammoot and his group finally met Margit, the Minister of Diplomatic Affairs to Torquia. Margit turned out to be a sharp and stylish lady who gave them a tour of the nation and introduced herself as the kulak, or leader, of the place. She assured them they didn't need to worry since the king knew about her position. Mammoot and his crew chatted with her about the Empire meeting earlier in the year. Then they stopped by the training grounds for the Lance Cavalry, where they watched soldiers practicing and messing around. Kiros asked Margit how her nation managed to make iron goods if they were so self-sufficient. Margit explained their process and mentioned their big iron ore supply. Out of nowhere, Mammoot spotted a northern goshawk flying overhead, which Margit recognized as her dad's pet eagle. She ran to greet him as he rode up on his horse, but got a scolding for being too hasty and rude. The king of Urado, King Zygmunt, introduced himself and threw down a challenge to Mammoot for an eagle bearers contest. Mammoot took him up on it and managed to impress the king with Iskender's skills. After the showdown, Mammoot starts thinking about the future and how teaming up with Torquay could be a game changer. It'd totally mess up the Empire's plans to invade. Zygmunt, on the other hand, respects the effort, but makes it clear he's not giving in to any of Mammoot's requests. His country's all about standing on its own 2 feet. Mammoot keeps quiet and goes on a nighttime stroll with the princess. Margit takes them to see the fishermen coming back and lets them soak in the beauty of it all. But then, the smell of fermented crap hits the mitts, coming from the cliffs to the west. Margit mentions that the stink actually keeps most folks, even from the Empire, away. As they head out of the village, they spot a local wandering into the snowy wilderness. Thankfully, they manage to bring him back to his family. Mammoot notices Margit's troubled expression and realizes something seriously off with this place. Later at dinner, Zygmunt spills the tea about why that guy was trying to end it all. Turns out, there's a famine wrecking their land, and since they're dirt poor, some of the older folks just wander off to die so there's more food for everyone else. Hanum loses it and calls out the king for feasting while his people starve. The king goes off on some rant about how his grandpa and great-grandpa died the same way, saying he might go out like that too. Mammoot cuts in, telling the king to trade with other countries to save his people, but the king's too stuck on keeping a 400-year-old tradition to listen. He's scared they'll end up like Phoenike if they change things. Meanwhile, a blonde girl in the background is eavesdropping on the whole dinner convo. After they finish eating, Zygmunt keeps running his mouth until everyone heads to bed. Once they're gone, Zygmunt decides to team up with the Empire the next day, with his blonde daughter, the one who was spying earlier, pushing him to go for it. Meanwhile, Mammoot and the crew can't sleep because the stink from the western cliffs is unbearable. Out of nowhere, Abariga recognizes the smell at Sturko, fossilized bird poop, like the kind found on Centro's Sud Island. If they can check out the cliffs, they might find something big. They get the minister's okay and head straight there. The cliffs reek of seabird droppings mixed with sand. Margit gives them the backstory on the droppings, and Abiriga explains Sturko's value. It's basically fossilized gold. He grabs a sample and sends it to Zaganos for testing. Zaganos and Suleiman run some tests, comparing it to a control sample, and bam, the Sturko from the snowy nation is way better quality than what they're used to. They send word back up north to Mammoot and his crew, letting them know they've hit the jackpot. But before they can celebrate, Zygmunt's guards show up and drag them to the throne room for an emergency meeting. Over there, Mammoot and his crew meet up with Zygmunt, his 2 daughters, and some illegitimate dude from the Empire. Things kick off, and Zygmunt agrees to team up with the Empire. The Empire's envoy starts spouting nonsense, making all these wild promises about how great life will be if they just follow their lead. Mammoot, though, figures he should speak his mind, so he throws caution to the wind and tells the king about this super high-quality Sturko they found. Abiriga jumps in to explain that Sturko is crazy valuable and could make Urado filthy rich for a long time. Mammoot promises that if they strike a deal with Torquay Pashalu, he'll personally make sure it all works out. The Empire, of course, tries to mess up Torquay's plans, but Margit steps in, calling out her clueless dad and saying the Empire's just gonna trap Urado in debt. If they sign up with the Empire, there's no way out. Her sister Gertrude, though, sides with the Empire, claiming they'd be better off rolling with the stronger team, the Empire. The envoy keeps running his mouth, spewing total garbage, until Mammoot interrupts and lays out the truth about what the Empire's really about. Mammoot's explanation makes it crystal clear to Zygmunt which side he should pick. To seal the deal, Zygmunt drags the envoy to the execution grounds and officially partners up with Torquay Pasha. So, Louis and the other big shots of the Empire are chilling with the Emperor, but the Emperor's not totally on board with Louis's pushy tactics to grab more land. Louis lays out some solid proof about how the Centro can't really take care of itself, so it's a good time to go after them. But then there's this short dude with goofy hair in a wheelchair who isn't buying it. He thinks wasting resources on pointless wars is dumb, and says the Empire's doing just fine without stirring up trouble. For once, the pacifists actually make some sense. The guy keeps arguing with Louis, but Louis claps back, saying violence is the only way to handle things. Corentin Pino, the general of the Balt-Rhine Land Army, jumps in too, making it clear he's not siding with Louis either. Louis calls them out, saying they're just jealous because he's smarter than them. He brushes off the failure to take the snowy city, saying it's no big deal, and keeps rambling on until the Emperor finally has to decide. In the end, the Emperor, who's just as shady as Louis, asks to hear Louis's next plan. Meanwhile, Mammoot and his crew are still in Urado, talking about how messed up it was that Zygmunt executed their envoy. Right then, the king walks in and confirms he's still tight with Torquay. Mammoot gets nervous and asks if the Empire might come after them for killing their envoy, but Zygmunt doesn't seem to care one bit about their drama. With that out of the way, Mammoot explains how they're going to distribute the Sturko goods to other nations for trade. He checks in with Hanum to make sure she's ready to handle the massive supply chain. Hanum, being a born merchant, tells him she's got it covered. Then Mammoot asks the king for permission to head back to Torquay the next day. Just as they're wrapping up, Margit shows up and introduces herself as Hanum's travel buddy. Hanum isn't thrilled but agrees to let Margit tag along. The next day, the crew hits the road for their long trip back to Torquay. On the way, Abiriga gives Mammoot props for getting Venedict and other states to turn against the Empire all on his own. What they don't know is that trouble's brewing back in Venedict. After butting heads with the Empire, Venedict and some other nations secretly agreed to look the other way while pirates attacked the Empire's fleet. But one nation, the Republic of Lisalani, decides to break the deal and lend the Empire a hand. Turns out, they've got their own sneaky plan going on. When Lucio catches wind of this, he sends Brega to Lisalani to figure out what their shady leader, Dioria, is up to. Brega sails over and confronts Doria, calling him out for being a backstabber, but Doria plays dumb, saying he doesn't always have control over what his country does. He acts all nice and promises to handle it while showing Brega and his crew around the city. After the meeting, Brega and his team are walking down some stairs, debating whether to trust Doria. Just then, they stumble on a group of actors freaking out over a sick guy named Paolo, who apparently brought a new plague to the city on a ship from the west. Brega and his partner take note and report the outbreak to Lucio ASAP. Meanwhile, Doria sneaks off to meet with some Empire agents, who pat him on the back for fooling Brega into thinking he's innocent. Doria's got big plans to take over Centro and wipe out Venedict, and the Empire guys are loving his twisted genius. Brega's playing it safe, keeping his ship docked until the plague blows over. When they make it back to Venedict, Lucio decides to pump the brakes on sea travel for now, just in case Doria is telling the truth about the plague spreading. Either way, they're prepping for whatever might come so they don't get caught off guard. Meanwhile, Mammoot heads straight home after arriving in Torquay. When he gets there, he finds Lucio chilling on his couch, puffing on a hookah. Mammoot's like, "What are you doing here?" Turns out, Lucio's in town to check out the next Divan meeting and see Torquay for himself. If the alliance works out, Berlik Torquay, Regatul Urado, and the Republic of Venedict can team up and ask other nations to help them push back against the Empire. Mammoot welcomes him to Torquay and hopes he has a great time. The next day, the big shots from all three nations meet up for another divan. Orhan gets a chance to swoon over his girl Aishi again. Once the meeting kicks off, Lucio gives a speech, pitching the idea of an alliance with the other nations. Buyuk Pasha's cool with it, but Zygmunt's got trust issues. Dude doesn't think Lucio's reliable and suspects he'll bail on the alliance if it suits him. Lucio claps back, reminding Zygmunt he's not squeaky clean either. He broke some ancient law in his capital not too long ago. Zygmunt calls on Mammoot, his buddy, to back him up. Mammoot steps up and defends Lucio, pointing out that Lucio showing up in person for the divan says a lot. As the meeting goes on, Buyuk gets word from Zaganos that a huge fleet from the Empire and Lisalani has blockaded Foiniki and Theros. If they don't break the blockade, Western Centro's toast. Aishi cuts in, showing everyone what's at stake if the Empire takes down the two strongest nations. That's when it hits Lucio has been playing right into Louis's hands. By taking the plague seriously and halting Venedict's shipping, he made a huge mistake, and now he's paying for it. Zygmunt, moved by Lucio's words, finally agrees to sign the alliance. With the alliance locked in, Zaganos and Halil Pasha start hashing out plans to move their troops to a good spot for the upcoming fight. Halil figures the Republic of Fiore won't let them pass through their land easily since they see Torquayans as barbarians. If they mess up, they could end up fighting Fiore instead. Bayezid suggests recruiting people along the way, and everyone's on board with the idea. Lucio, on the other hand, plans to head back to Venedict to rally the smaller Centro nations, who might be leaning towards siding with the Empire. Once he's got them on board, he'll lead them west by sea. sea. In the next scene, Lucio suits up in some tight-fitting armor, while Bayezid gets a personal caravan ready for him. Zaganos and Suleiman have a final chat about calming any unrest in Fiore and other places before Torquier's main forces roll in. Mammoot and his crew tag along with Suleiman to the southern nations to work on getting their gates open before the army arrives. Meanwhile, Buyuk and Zygmunt figure out how to split up their troops to help in the war. Buyuk asks Zaganos to lead the main forces, but Zaganos turns it down, saying his skills are better used elsewhere. Halil steps up, takes the role, and throws a little shade, saying he's experienced and won't make dumb rookie mistakes like some overconfident fools. Louis, on the other hand, keeps scheming to create his dream world. Near the Dux Regionis Ovest, the moon turns blood red, signaling the Imperial fleet's arrival. In just one night, the Empire wipes out the entire fortress of Ovest Dux Regionis, kicking off the Great Rumeriana War. After taking over Ovest, Pino headed straight for the Dux Regionis Scoglio and told the leader, Dux Regulus, to throw in the towel. Once Regulus saw how huge the Imperial army was, he had no choice but to give up and surrender. Meanwhile, Mammoot and his crew were riding hard toward the Cor di Rumeriana, a region made up of 34 city-states, each tinier than the next, and all of them way too proud for their own good. Their first stop was the Republic of Arno, a place so small that even Mammoot was shocked. When they got to the city gates, they saw a crowd of people whining and protesting. Out of nowhere, this skinny guy dashed to the palace gates, grabbed a few bags of gold, and headed back to his squad. On his way, he spotted Mammoot and his crew, noticed they were from different places, and gave them a quick thanks before getting back to whatever he was doing. Suleiman explained that these guys were mercenaries from Tauro, known as the El Toro. They were in Arno to make some quick cash and were usually pretty shady. Since none of the cities in the region had strong armies, it made sense that these mercenaries could do whatever they wanted. Inside the castle, Gonfalonier Giulio was throwing a fit about how crappy the El Toro mercenaries were, even though he'd paid them a ton of money. He finally chilled out when Suleiman and the crew showed up to talk. Once they had his attention, Mammoot explained the recent blockade between Foinike and Tharos, hoping Giulio would see where he was coming from. Turns out, Giulio already knew about the blockade and the Jurado-Torquay alliance. Mammoot made his case and asked Giulio to let the Torquayan army pass through his city, but Giulio wasn't having it. He snapped back, saying he couldn't make that call on his own. If they wanted that to happen, they'd need permission from Fiore, the main hub of the Corte Rumeriana. If they didn't follow Fiore's rules, they'd get kicked out of the region. After dealing with the sweaty and stressed out Giulio, Mammoot and his crew took a breather to talk about all the hate they were getting as Torquians in the Corte Rumeriana. Suleiman pointed out that these spoiled people were so used to their peace that they couldn't see the Empire's schemes coming. Determined to get their message across, Mammoot and his team headed to Fiore as fast as they could. Meanwhile, Giacomo and his two clueless buddies were sitting in a pub in Fiore, drinking and whining about the war that was about to hit. The Empire wasn't just blockading the Centro War, they were also making life tough for all the other cities. Fiore was stuck in the middle of it all, whether they liked it or not, and didn't have the manpower to fight back. The next morning, Mammoot and his crew arrived in Fiore, dressed to impress, and got ready to meet the Gonfalonier. On the way, Suleiman reminded them to keep things short and sweet, since the Gonfalonier didn't have time for long speeches. Mammoot carefully planned what he was going to say and led the way. When they got inside the castle, Mammoot was blown away by how stunning the art gallery was. Suleiman gave him a heads up not to take the castle folks' insults too personally, since they'd probably try to push his buttons. When they finally make it to the Gonfalonier's room, they find Katerina herself just hanging out, waiting for them. Katerina greets her old fling. Suleiman says hey to Mammoot, who's totally caught off guard, but polite-ianed, and then acknowledges the rest of the group. She seems to vibe well with Mammoot and helps him feel at ease. Soon enough, they get down to business. Katerina starts off by stalling a bit, casually mentioning she knows about the Empire's blockade. Mammoot, meanwhile, keeps losing focus as Katerina makes tea. Then, she drops news about an emergency Corte di Rumeriana assembly happening the next day, and does something that throws Mammoot completely off. Turns out, she's messing with Suleiman under the table, tickling his feet, while Mammoot's trying to grab his hat. By the time Mammoot's supposed to give his input, the timer for the meeting runs out. Later, Mammoot and his crew hit up a nearby pub to talk about how Katerina threw him off his game. Abiriga, the only one thinking clearly, points out that Katerina never meant to negotiate with them in the first place. The big question is, why'd she even meet with them today instead of waiting for the assembly tomorrow? They toss around some theories, but none of them really stick. Meanwhile, Giacomo and his crew hear about Katerina's meeting with the Torquians. Giacomo keeps quiet while the other old guys trash talk Katerina for possibly teaming up with Torquay. After mulling it over, Giacomo drops a bombshell, telling them to side with the Empire instead. A few dozen miles away, in the Dux region of Scoglio, the city's kulak is running from a Rodorm guard who caught him sneaking around earlier. The kulak leads the guard to an isolated spot, takes him out, and gets ready to send a message message to Suleiman ASAP. Before he can, he overhears General Pino giving a speech, claiming the Empire has already staked its claim on Phoenician land. Realizing how bad things are, the Kulak hurries to warn Fiore, Cielo, Arno, Altu, and another nation in the east. After sending his message, Eleanor shows up and kills him. Back in Fiore, Suleiman is trying to figure out what Katarina's deal is. Unfortunately, no one's willing to spill any dirt on her. That night, Giacomo and his crew show up with a pile of signatures from regular folks demanding Katarina never side with Torquay. They question her loyalty, pointing out how much damage Torquay has caused, and warning her not to ignore the past. After hearing them out, Katarina assures them she's not on Torquay's side yet. She thanks them for stopping by and sends them on their way. Once they're gone, she hangs up Suleiman's portrait on her wall, calling him her lover, and apologizes for betraying him. The next day, a guard delivers the Kulak's message from Skoglio to Suleiman. After seeing what the Empire has done in Foinike and Skoglio, Suleiman decides to take a tougher approach with the peace-loving folks of Fiore. He storms into the assembly hall, interrupts their meeting, and shows them the latest news from Skoglio. Katarina and her crew reveal their plan to set up a third neutral power in Rumeriana to stay out of the Torquay-Balt-Rhine war. Mammoot is left completely stunned. After hearing the crap Katarina just spewed, Suleiman and Mammoot are totally floored. Katarina brushes off their shock and keeps rambling about all the signatures she collected from people that supposedly stop her from letting the Torquian army pass through Fiore. She's talking so much nonsense that Suleiman grabs the agreement letter on her desk and burns it to ashes. After pulling that bold move, he tells Katarina to take a look at a letter a Torquian farmer risked his life to deliver. He shows her the blood-stained letter, and then Abiriga and Kiros slam the door shut to keep the guards out and buy themselves some time. Suleiman explains what went down between the Empire and Skoglio 3 days ago, while Mammoot breaks down how Foinike's ignorance led to their downfall. He tells them there's still a chance to fix things, but some of the older politicians grill Mammoot with questions to make sure the letter is legit. Mammoot reassures them that Suleiman isn't the kind of guy who'd lie, especially not to the Gonfalonier. When the guards finally show up, Katarina has Suleiman and his crew thrown in jail and puts the meeting on hold to figure out other options for Fiore and the Cuore di Rumeriana to survive the crisis. While locked up, Giacomo and his gang won't stop whining about Katarina even thinking about helping Torquay. Soon enough, word comes in confirming that Suleiman Bey has been telling the truth. Katarina calls Mammoot and his crew back to her office and officially agrees to side with the Torquian Tripartite Alliance. Mammoot thanks her for understanding, and Katarina wishes them luck while she keeps working on ways to protect her region. Mahmoud thanks her again and promises to send a message to Halil and the Torquian forces to start moving through Cuore di Rumeriana. With their business with Katarina wrapped up, they head towards South Rumeriana, Taro specifically, to keep the negotiations going. Suleiman, however, decides to stay behind to take care of something before catching up with them. When Giacomo and his crew hear about Katarina's decision, they're furious and decide to handle things themselves. Since Katarina's quarters are always surrounded by guards, they plan to use a hidden passageway from the Rossi family to sneak in. Dressed like criminals, they carry out their plan and make it to Katarina's quarters. There, they confront her about her decision and demand that she reconsider letting Torquay pass through their territory. After hearing them out, Katarina makes it clear that staying neutral isn't an option. If they do, they'll lose everything. As the Gonfalonier of Fiore, she's standing firm on her decision. At this point, the old men have had enough. They shove Giacomo aside and hold Katarina at knife point. Just as they're about to stab her, Suleiman bursts in through the vents and saves her. He handles the situation and explains everything to Giacomo, assuring him that Fiore is in good hands. The next day, Kiros and Mahmoud are chatting about the sketchy mercenaries they ran into and figure out they're connected to the next city they're heading to. Just as luck would have it, they stumble across a random spring bath and find some orange-haired fool chilling there. This guy starts trash-talking Mahmoud until he realizes Mahmoud's actually a Pasha. Turns out, this dude's name is Urbach or something, and he promises to take them to the twin mayors of Taro eventually. Mahmoud and his crew tag along. Meanwhile, Blanca, the Kulak of Campana, is keeping tabs on the Empire's army as they march through a ravine in secret. At the same time, Halil Pasha gets word from Mahmoud and wastes no time getting his troops ready to move toward Fiore so they can push on to Pino. As for Mahmoud and his squad, they make it to Toro in one piece and meet the twin mayors, who are a real handful. These twins think Mahmoud's not all that, so they decide to test him to see if he's got what it takes to lead. The challenge? Mahmoud has to use 400 mercenaries to take control of the castle gate they're defending. If he can snag the feather off the first mayor's hat, he wins. Next thing you know, Mahmoud's handed the 400 mercenaries, and the game's on. Over in Venedig, Lucio Doge is gearing up his nation for war. He orders non-stop shifts at the shipyards and calls for Brega's fleet to return home. Zaganos gets intel on where the Empire's at and realizes there's no backing out of this fight. Mahmoud and his team crush the mayor's test, while Aishi breaks down their military strategy for Koikimo. She warns him that the Empire is no joke, and that he needs to be just as crafty as they are. Meanwhile, Bayezid is also prepping for war in his country, and Ismail, the Sultan of Buchak, is arming his troops to make sure they're ready to fight. Later that afternoon, Mammoot and his crew pass the test and earn the trust of the Toro brothers. Wang chimes in about the upcoming battle, and Hanum and Margit gripe about all the chaos the Empire brings. Hanum reassures Margit that Mammoot's there to make things better, so there's no need to stress about the war. After winning the challenge, Mammoot gets the green light from Taro to let Torquier's army pass through. That night, Pino and his goons burn Campana to the ground. As the city goes up in flames, a brilliant young engineer watches his master and everyone he's ever cared about perish. The engineer, Vasco, grabs the blueprints for some special machine, hides inside the city's massive bell, and rolls himself down a hill, crashing into a bunch of Empire soldiers. Vasco blacks out for a bit and almost gets killed by some guards, but Blanca shows up just in time to take out the guards and save him. She takes Vasco to the Allied camp while his city burns behind them. Mammoot's hanging out with the Tauro mercenaries, eating, drinking, and chatting it up with the twins. Pretty quickly, he figures out they're all about the cash. Wasting no time, he uses some of Torquier's Big Daddy money to lock down 500 mercenaries by throwing down a deposit and promising to settle the rest later. The twins are cool with the deal and jump right into getting things ready. Meanwhile, that jerk from the hot springs earlier, Urbach or whatever his name is, shows up and decides he's joining Mammoot's crew. The guy says he's curious to see where Mammoot's journey is going to take him. A few thousand miles away, Louis is stressing over a chess piece he thinks represents Torquier's last shot at survival. If his plans work out, he won't have to worry about that kind of power showing up. Back with Mammoot, he and his crew snag Espada's support and start heading toward Cielo. Right then, some kulak shows up with news that the Empire just took over Campana. Hearing this, Mammoot realizes they're running out of time. For now, he's focused on getting to Cielo fast and locking in an alliance before the Empire beats them to it. On their way to safety, Blanca and Vasco run into a ton of refugees wandering through the mountains, looking for a place to call home. After chatting with a few stragglers, Blanca figures out they're deserters from Center and other small towns that gave up to the Empire's forces. She asks them where they're headed, and they say they're trying to get to Cielo. Meanwhile, Mammoot and his crew are climbing the tricky mountain paths to get to Cielo. They're on their way to meet the Fiore director and talk business. Abiriga gives them a quick rundown on Cielo, explaining it's a refugee nation that's grown over time by taking in prisoners of war and wanderers. To keep things running smoothly, Cielo's leaders are called directors. It's been pretty chill for them because they keep things low-key and don't stir up trouble. Later, Mammoot and his group head to a theater where the director of Cielo is performing a play about their version of heaven and earth. Urbach explains the play's meaning to Mammoot, who's not impressed and didn't realize the lead actor is actually the director. Urbach also explains the concept of Cielo's key to Mammoot, and they wait for the director to finish his performance. When the director, Carbajal, finally wraps up, he offers the so-called bad guys a shot at redemption if they're willing to be forgiven. Not everyone's on board with this, and they call him out for changing the script, but Carbajal doesn't care. He keeps talking about good versus bad until his assistant shows up and reminds him about his meeting with the guests. Carbajal steps off the stage and heads to his office. Before he leaves, Mammoot asks if he's really the one running Cielo. Realizing Mammoot is here on business, Carbajal invites him to hang out in his quarters. On their way up the mountain to the office, Carbajal and his assistant explain how Cielo is funded by rich donors who have more money than they know what to do with. They also talk about how Cielo is blessed with fertile land and thriving ports for farming and fishing. Thanks to their donors, the people of Cielo have been living well for over 1,000 years. After some more talking and hiking, they finally reach the assembly hall. There, they see representatives of the refugees waiting outside Cielo's gates, begging for asylum to heal their sick and find shelter. At the time, there were about 30,000 refugees gathered there, with more arriving every day. Carbajal tells Cassandra, his partner, to let them in and start helping them right away. Urbach and Kiros try to warn him about pissing off the Empire too much, but Carbajal doesn't care. He knows leaving people to die of hunger and thirst goes against everything his nation stands for. Whether the Empire gets mad or not, they're not about to change their ways. If anyone dares to mess with them, they'll deal with the consequences. Mammoot takes the chance to ask Carbajal to join their anti-Empire alliance to help end the war. Carbajal listens to Mammoot's pitch and agrees to do what's needed. 13 days later, Pino and his right-hand woman are planning their next move against Halil Pasha and his army. She tells him Halil is currently in Taro and taking it easy. To win the war, they'll need to act fast and get to him before he's ready. Halil Pasha is chilling, getting some sweet massages from the twin mayor's ladies. After the session, they sit down to chat about the latest updates on his army's march through Cordi Rumeriana. The mayors promise to make his journey through their land worthwhile. Halil thanks them for their support and lays out the Torquian army's plans. Right then, Blanca and Vasco show up from Campana to meet with Halil. Halil welcomes them and listens to what they have to say. Vasco, a foundry worker, introduces himself and shows Halil the blueprints for a massive Shark-Yay weapon he's been working on. He's hoping Halil will back him to build it for the fight against the Empire's army. But Halil isn't feeling Hythe shoots down the idea, saying it's not doable right now. Vasco tries to change his mind, but Halil's already made up his mind. To make sure the plans don't fall into enemy hands, Halil burns them and tells Vasco to let it go. Just then, a Torquian soldier shows up with urgent news. The Imperial forces are on the move toward Cielo. Halil quickly excuses himself, jumps on his horse, and heads out with his army, aiming to beat the Empire there. Meanwhile, Vasco pulls out a backup copy of his plans and keeps working on his project. Over in Cielo, Carbajal and Cassandra figure out the Empire's next move. Mahmoud and his crew also catch wind of the Empire's plans and realize the enemy has a solid strategy. They start evacuating the city, getting ready for the incoming war. Morale is low, but Carbajal reassures them about Cielo's cage, a trap designed to wipe out any enemies dumb enough to enter. For now, they've got nothing to worry about. The next day, the Torquian army arrives, and Mammoot rushes out to welcome Halil Pasha to the city. After some polite greetings, Halil decides to set up camp outside Cielo. A few dozen miles away, two Imperial commanders, Frenson and Adam, are chilling with some Cielo spring apples when, out of nowhere, the bridge connecting two mountains collapses. They immediately realize it's Cielo's doing and decide to head back to Fondo for more supplies. The next day, Carbajal and Mammoot do a head count of the Imperial forces and figure there are about 67,000 troops. Not long after, the Imperial army shows up and starts chatting about the cool wooden houses in Cielo and how they were built. Adam reminds Pilo that Cielo hasn't given up yet, and with their supply lines cut, the Imperials are the ones stuck in a tough spot. Adam's right-hand woman brings up their 12th army, led by Crystal Balls, and says they're counting on them to deliver food and supplies. Balls promises to get the supplies to them soon. Meanwhile, Mammoot and Carbajal start prepping for the siege. Later that night, Balls and his crew spot Cielo's militia lying in wait, ready to jack their supplies. They quickly get into battle mode and try to hold off Cielo's forces, but since Mammoot is leading the attack, the Imperials don't stand much of a chance. After taking out the fighters, Mammoot and his team torch the Empire's supplies and bounce. Pino and his group see the fire but keep their cool. Balls and his army notice the Haubia gate opening and rush in, hoping to storm the city and hit Cielo from the inside. After seeing the 12th Division march through Haubia, Pino and his squad head toward the gates too. The Torquian army notices everyone piling into the gates and waves them off. Once two army corps are inside, the Empire's forces stop because Frenzel senses something fishy about the gates. He figures it's a trap and realizes they'd be idiots to just walk into it. When Balls sees the 1st Division hesitate, he starts to get nervous too, but his commander, nicknamed Four Eyes, pushes him to keep moving into the city. So, he does. When they're deep enough in, Cielo dumps oil all over the wooden parts of the city and sets it on fire. Unfortunately for the Empire, about 10,000 of their men get caught in the trap, but the real heavy hitters are still outside, ready to fight. After seeing Cielo's endgame, Pino puts 20,000 men at the rear and moves forward to set up a blockade with the rest of his forces. Back at the Empire, Louis is schooling his assistant, Nicolo, on how iron gets turned into useful stuff while they're watching a fight between Glalet and some random dude in the arena. Once Nicolo gives a decent answer, Louis dives deeper into the topic as Glalet finally wins the match. While Glalet's grabbing his prize money, Louis breaks down the importance of the Rod Orm people, so Nicolo gets why those guys are such a big deal for keeping the Empire's weapons in top shape. Meanwhile, after checking out Cielo's secret weapon, Frenzel tells Pino and the crew to chill and keep an eye out for whatever the director's planning next. Carbajal, on the other hand, is hanging back, waiting for the general and his squad to roll through the gates. After waiting a while, he shuts the gates and moves on to prep for the next attack. The next day, Carbajal apologizes to Mammoot for not taking out more Imperial soldiers in the last fight. Mammoot tells him it's all good and promises his efforts won't be forgotten. Back at their camp, Pino and his subgenerals decide to switch things up. Pino orders 22 soldiers who sat out the first siege to roll with him to Torquier's camp, planning to take down whoever's there and snag their supplies. After calling the generals to action, Pino leaves Frenzel in charge of the camp while he's gone. Later, Frenzel and Adam start wondering why the military engineers are getting involved in this fight. They figure it's part of the lady strategist's plan to take down Torquier faster. Frenzel shoots her a glare, clearly not a fan. By midday, Carbajal, Mammoot, and the others notice part of the Imperial army heading toward Torquier's camp. They talk about the odds of Torquier losing, but from the number of soldiers Mammoot counts, it's pretty clear Torquier's got the upper hand. When Halil Pasha hears about the Empire's forces, he wastes no time packing up and getting the hell out of there. 8 days later, Pino and his troops reach Torquier's last campsite, only to find scraps of what was left behind. It doesn't take long for them to figure out Halil Pasha's trying to dodge a fight by keeping a 2-day gap between them. 3 days after that, Halil Pasha gets word about a river they can cross on their way out of the Empire's reach. He starts planning to cross it, thinking it's a solid escape route. What he doesn't know is that the Imperial soldiers are sharp as hell. They whip up some rafts out of logs and close the 2-day gap in just a few hours by floating down the river. Meanwhile, Halil and his crew are taking it easy until they run straight into their worst nightmare, the Empire. The Imperial soldiers were all set up, weapons ready, itching for a fight. Adam couldn't help but be impressed by the drop-dead gorgeous strategist, who had that whole bimbo vibe going on. Meanwhile, Halil Pasha knew the only way out of this mess was to start the battle and see it through. He went with this super old school, predictable formation and sent about 8,000 men to lead the charge so the setup could be locked in. The battle horn goes off, and Halil's horse archers make their move, charging at Pino's forces and raining arrows on the Imperial soldiers. But the Empire came prepared with tough-as-nails shields, so the arrows didn't do much damage. Halil doubled down, letting his horse archers get wrecked by Pino's second wave of lance-wielding soldiers. When Halil saw the Imperial front line wasn't budging, he pulled back the lancers and sent in another round of horse archers. Pino stuck to the same shield strategy, blocking the arrows again. That's when Pino realized Halil was dusting off a strategy he'd used like 14 years ago. Back then, Pino had faced off against him and recognized the play. This time though, the Imperial army had cliffs at their back, so Pino figured they were safe. But surprise, surprise, Halil's 8,000 soldiers had climbed the rocks behind them and were now sneaking up on the Imperial rear. Halil and his crew rushed in, thinking they'd finally trapped the Imperial army. Just when they thought they'd won, Pino pulled a fast one. He opened up his formation, letting Halil's troops charge in, only to surround them and trap them instead. Halil's 8,000 men charged forward, aiming to finish off the Imperial army, but they ran smack into giant cannons set up by the Imperial engineers. As soon as they got close, the engineers fired, obliterating the rear attack force in minutes. The encirclement was complete, and Halil was totally screwed. A few Imperial commanders gave props to the engineers for their genius. As the 2nd Division from the rear moved in, the Imperial soldiers fired another round of cannonballs, smashing into the 2nd Division and throwing them into chaos. Adam stood by, watching his commander, waiting for the next move. On the other side, Halil was panicking, trying to break out of the trap by throwing his troops at the front lines. But it was already game over. Adam and some mustached dude gave Lady Kokoschka a shout-out for her killer strategy. Lady Coco, being all humble, passed the credit to Louis for coming up with the brilliant plan. Meanwhile, Louis was busy tweaking the strategy and revealing the inspiration behind the soul-crushing cannon design. The battle kept raging, and things went from bad to worse for Halil. His right-hand man, Abbas, got killed. Halil, in a last-ditch effort, charged straight at Pino, but he didn't even get close. The enemy lancers stopped him in his tracks, stabbing him over and over before Pino stepped in and finished the job by chopping off his head with his sword. A few days later, Mammoot and the others see Halil Pasha's head stuck on a stake as the Imperial army marches back to Cielo with Torkian prisoners of war in tow. Word about the Empire's backstabbing reaches Torkie Pashalu fast, and a divan is called to figure out how to deal with such a dirty move. After hearing all the awful stuff the Empire did to the Torkian soldiers, it's no surprise some folks want payback. But Zaganos steps in and tells everyone to use their brains instead of acting on impulse. He sees this as the perfect moment to make a smart move. When someone else starts whining about avenging Halil's death, Zaganos lays out the cold, hard truth about why Halil screwed up. While the Empire was busy building up its army, Halil was off trying to make peace deals everywhere. He got careless, and it cost him his life. Zaganos even uses himself as an example, promising that he'll be the one to crush Baltrine. Meanwhile, Suleiman takes a moment to grieve for Halil Pasha, who was a major influence in his life. After reading Halil's final message, he shares a few inspiring words to honor him. Mammoot, on the other hand, remembers the important moments he shared with Halil Pasha. When he's done reminiscing, he pulls himself together, wipes his tears, and calls himself out for being weak. Then, Halil's ghost shows up anime style to give him some motivational words. In their own ways, Zaganos, Suleiman, and Mammoot all pay their respects to the late Pasha. Once Mammoot is finished crying, he stands up, gathers his courage, and vows to make the Empire pay big time. After grabbing the Torkian army's supplies, the Empire decides to play the long game with a war of attrition against the Cielo forces, leaving both sides stuck in a deadlock. Worried their own supplies might run out, Mammoot asks Venedict for backup. Doge Lucio doesn't waste any time and sets sail with his fleet, aiming for the blockade between Phoenike and Theros that the Republic of Lisalani's Boccanegra Armada is holding for the Empire. After days of intense fighting, Venedict's fleet finally busts through and takes out the captain running the blockade. After dealing with that fool, Lucio has a chat with Doria to smooth things over and make sure there's no bad blood. They end up shaking hands and agreeing to crush the Empire at sea, while keeping a low profile until a new ruler for the Centro is picked. Lucio smirks and tells Doria he's not getting that chance. By May 18th, the Empire loses its grip on the Centro, thanks to Venedict making sure of it. But as Venedict's fleet sails through rough waters, a crazy month-long storm keeps them from reaching Cielo on time. This delay puts Cielo in a tough spot as they struggle to hold their ground against the Empire. When the storm finally clears, Kiros lets out a breath of relief, waiting for good news from Mammoot Pasha. Turns out, Mammoot used the storm as cover to sneak off and meet up with some important allies. But with the storm gone, Carbajal has a new head of keys. People are in bad shape. The endless rain has trashed their food supplies, and the refugees they took in are getting sicker by the day. Since Venedict's fleet didn't show up on time, the locals are starting to think they've been betrayed, just like what happened in Phoenike. Carbajal sits quietly in a meeting while everyone else freaks out. When he finally speaks, he tells them to chill and trust Mammoot Pasha, who's out there rallying the remaining Torquians. At that moment, one angry guy pulls a knife and holds it to Carbajal's throat, saying sorry in advance for what he's about to do. Meanwhile, Mammoot and a small group finally link up with the 15,000 or so soldiers who survived. He thanks the person who saved many of them and takes a moment to honor Halil Pasha's memory. Once he collects himself, he orders everyone to gear up and prepare to head back to Cielo. Back in Cielo, Kiros rushes to Abariga and Elbark to spill the tea about what just went down with the director. Around the same time, Abariga and his buddy get a signal from Iskender, confirming that Mammoot successfully regrouped with the survivors. When Kiros arrives, he lays it all out, including the people's plan to hand over the director to the Empire and surrender. Yeah, that's a serious problem. The Imperial soldiers are just kicking back, taking it easy, and gearing up for the next round against Cielo. Adam and Frenzel are griping about how Cielo's supplies are running low. While they're chatting and complaining, Frenzel hears heavy thudding, like a whole enemy squad is rushing their camp. He steps outside and sees the Torquian cavalry, led by Mammoot, charging straight for them. Pino and Lady Coco spot the incoming army and immediately get ready to throw down. Mammoot's cavalry rains arrows on the Imperial soldiers, and then he sends Iskender to mess with their battle bulls. Iskender nails it, completely wrecking the formation of the Empire's 8 divisions. While the Empire scrambles to fix the chaos, Mammoot pulls a slick movie, sneaks one of his guys into the Imperial sheep pen. The soldier opens the gates and herds the sheep toward the Torquian army. Once they're clear, another dude takes over and leads the sheep back to Mammoot's cavalry. With the sheep secured, Mammoot retreats, leaving the Empire without any food to keep going. During their after-action review, the Imperial generals are ticked off about the blonde commander's sneaky tactics to swipe their food. When they ask for a description of the guy, they're told he carries a golden eagle emblem. Meanwhile, Mammoot's crew is hyped, giving him props for putting a dent in the Empire's supplies. That night, 2 bumbling fools rush to the Hobbia gate to hand over a surrender letter to Pino so they can hoist the white flag and turn Carbajal over to him. Luckily, Urbach and some random dude handle the situation before those clowns can screw things up. As for the flag carriers, Abiriga and Kiros quietly take them out and watch the Imperial soldiers from a distance. From their spot, they see the soldiers heading off to fight another battle. They're not about to let the fools surrender and make sure to track down Carbajal, while Mammoot keeps the Imperial troops busy. Frenzel and Adam talk about Coco's current situation, hoping her smarts can finally give the Empire a win. The next day, a couple of generals chat about the Torquians hiding out in Espada territory, where they're resting and recovering. Before long, they realize how connected the eastern side of Rumeriana is, with supplies constantly flowing into Espada to keep the Torquian forces strong. One of the generals asks Coco, the master strategist, how the Torquians are pulling it off. She answers with something Louis once told her. Apparently, Louis mentioned a ray of hope that he feared could mess up his plans to take over the Torquian states. Coco lets Pino and the others know that this ray of hope might just be the blonde eagle bearer, who also happens to be Halil Pasha's foster son. 4 days later, Mammoot sends out messenger pigeons with his last message to Torquier Pashalu. By nightfall, he and his soldiers are cruising across the grassy plains, heading for a basin under the full moon. The bright moonlight lights up their path, and Mammoot's crew is feeling good. 2 days later, Coco figures out where the Torquian army is going to set up camp. It's near the Espadan border in a basin. She fills her army in on the update and starts hashing out a plan. After listening to a bunch of useless chatter from clueless folks, Coco finally steps up and fires up the general, telling him they need to catch up to the Torquian army and settle this once and for all. After 2 more days on the move, Mammoot and his squad roll into the basin. Right away, they can feel the tension in the air as the Imperial forces show up to face them. Soon enough, both sides are staring each other down. Once the Imperial soldiers unload from their rafts, Mammoot gives the signal, and 3,000 Espadan soldiers hiding in the tall grass spring up for a surprise attack. Not long after, reinforcements from Humo, Taro, and some smaller cities roll in to surround the Imperial army. Coco quickly realizes she messed up big time, thinking she could trap the Torquian army. In the end, Mammoot stands tall and gets his moment to shine before squaring off with the Empire. So the Empire's in a tight spot, and there's not much they can do to save their own skin. Their only move in this game of survival is to fight their way out of Mammoot's trap. For the first part of his plan, Mammoot tells his archers to get their flaming arrows ready. Once everything's set, they fire at the rafts to pin down the Imperial soldiers even more. But Pino's not throwing in the towel, just Yeth orders the 7th and 8th divisions to take on the Espadan and Humaean armies. He also sends backup from 2 other divisions to help them out. Once that's squared away, he leads the remaining 4 divisions to go after the Torquian army and try to wipe them out for good. As the Imperial soldiers shift into their new formations, the Espadans, El Toro, and their crew charge at the 14 divisions to mess up their plans. The 14th division gets their ballistic weapons ready to stall for reinforcements. But just as they're about to fire, the El Toro mercenaries throw a big ladder at them, breaking up their formation and pushing toward the cannons. Right before the Imperials can fire, the twin mayors swoop in and destroy the cannons. With the cannons out of the picture, Mammoot can attack the Empire without any worries. The mercenaries give the signal to the other Torquian divisions, and everyone rushes the Imperial soldiers all at once. Pino and Coco spot the Torquians trying to break out of their trap, and they know they can't let that happen. they immediately call for reinforcements. While waiting for backup, the 7th and 8th Divisions get tricked by the sneaky Espadon soldiers into chasing them straight into Mammoot's trap. The Imperials are so clueless about what's going on around them that they don't even notice the dry moat the Espadons dug into the ground. By the time they start falling in, it's game over. With half their soldiers gone, the Espadons swarm the rest and take them out in no time. Pino gets word that his 7th and 8th Divisions are done for. Meanwhile, the mercenaries torch everything tied to the 13th Division, leaving nothing behind. Around this time, Mammoot spots a way out of the encirclement and makes a run for it. The 11th Division tries to leave the trap to back up the fallen ranks, but the mercenaries crush them right away. Now the encirclement's busted, and the Empire's already lost 3 or 4 divisions. Reinforcements show up, but way too late. Mammoot seizes the chance to overwhelm the 7th and 8th Divisions to finish them off for good. Coco quickly catches on to their plan but realizes both armies are stuck in a deadlock. What she doesn't know is that Mammoot's still got a few tricks up his sleeve. When the time's right, he sneaks up from behind, leaps into the air, and wrecks one of the divisions. With the 7th and 8th Divisions completely wiped out, the shattered commander is left alone. It doesn't take long for an enemy stampede to find him and take him down while he's holding the Imperial flag. Back in the Empire, Louis the Bastard gets a bad feeling about all this and starts worrying about what's happening to his troops on the battlefield. Right now, Reyes, the chatty captain, finally gets how bad things have spiraled. He blurts out some dumb last words before charging at another big shot Torquian. This time though, Ryus gets taken out by the Torquian soldiers. Meanwhile, Coco and Pino get word that Captain Barnett managed to escape. Coco thinks it's a win since they need to keep the military engineers alive. She tells Pino to round up what's left of their Imperial army, head to Espada, the closest city, and snag it while their defenses are still weak. If they can pull that off, bouncing back will be a breeze. There's some back and forth about the plan, but in the end, Coco convinces Pino to gather his remaining troops and march toward Espada. Not long after, the 5th Division's commander hears about Pino's decision to bail on the fight. To help Pino get away, he puts his division in Torquier's path, hoping to hold them off. But within minutes, Mammoot shows up and steamrolls through the 5th Division like it's nothing. Meanwhile, Kiros and his crew take a breather to piece together clues and figure out where the director's being held. Soon enough, they spot Mammoot's victory signal and give him the props he deserves. After sending the signal, Mammoot keeps chasing down the enemy, while Kiros and the others keep scouring the area for the director. Coco and Pino see Torquier's victory signal and are totally fuming over this temporary win. While the other commanders complain about how annoying Torquier's strategy is, Coco stays quiet. When Pino asks her what's up, she admits she miscalculated. Pino can't help but notice the irony. Thought this loss would crush the Torquian army's morale, but it only made them stronger. Early the next morning, the Torquians start firing arrows at the Imperial Army's rear divisions. The commander there is focused and ready, but it hits him too late. He's been played. When Mammoot and his troops emerge from the fog, it's game over for the commander as his division gets wiped out in the chaos. Pino and the scraps of his army keep rushing toward Espada, but they can see a dust cloud closing in fast. One guy realizes Coco's plan is already falling apart but keeps his cool, hoping they won't run into any traps ahead. Along the way, some injured Imperial soldier starts ranting about how the Empire is so righteous. Even though their actions are brutal and forceful, the pain's clearly messing with his head as he slowly dies. His buddy lays him down for a moment, but as soon as he hits the ground, scavengers hiding in the trees jump out, weapons ready. Pino tells his troops to ignore them and focus on making it to Espada alive. When they finally arrive, they waste no time setting up ladders to start a siege. With the attack about to kick off, Pino places soldiers at the back lines to stop any surprise attacks. Then, Lintz, the leader of Espada's hired mercenaries, pops up on the city walls to warn Pino and his crew not to get too cocky. Soon after, Mammoot and his army show up. Before the fight begins, Mammoot gives them a chance to surrender and end this mess peacefully. At this point, Coco's feeling emotional and desperate. Standing on her horse, she estimates the Torquian forces at about 13,000. Since they still have 15,000 troops, Coco thinks they've got a shot at winning if they fight. Pino shuts her up and orders his men to raise their flags, ready to take over the city and hold off the Torquians. With that, Mammoot clenches his fist, gearing up to finish the final chapter of the Great Rumeriana War. Blanca and Vasco get the lowdown on the war from a village lady. When Blanca hears what's going down in Cielo, she rushes to Vasco to let him know the war's almost over. Vasco's pretty stoked about the news and hopes the guy ending the war makes it out alive to tell the story. Meanwhile, Pino keeps pushing his takeover of Espada. He sends some of his troops to hold off Torquier while he charges into Espada, ready to claim the city. Mahmoud waits for the perfect moment to strike. When the time's right, he attacks the Imperial soldiers blocking his path to Pino. Pino, thinking there were only 1,000 mercenaries guarding Espada, fires up his remaining men to fight. Just as they're about to kick things off, Linz crushes his hopes by revealing there are actually 10,000 mercenaries protecting the city. She throws in a jab about their client being filthy rich before raining arrows down on the Imperial troops. Back in Cielo, Cassandra, Kiros, Abariga, and Urbach are worried sick after searching everywhere for Carbajal. The only place left to check is the Tower of Silence, which is a long shot but their last hope. On the battlefield, the the Imperial soldiers are getting wrecked, losing half of their 11th Division, with more dropping by the minute. One commander tries to convince Pino to surrender to save the remaining troops, but another commander knows it's already game over. She charges into the fight and gets herself killed. After Noel, the commander, dies, the 10th Division's leader rallies his men with an emotional speech, but it just sends them straight into the enemy's hands. Mammoot tears through the clueless soldiers with deadly precision. The search crew heads to the Tower of Silence, where Abariga realizes they'll have to climb to the top. No one complains because they know they've got to fix this mess before it's too late. Erebok gets curious and asks Kiros why Mammoot claims to hate war, but is so damn good at it. His strategies are next level. Kiros doesn't bother answering and just lets him figure it out on his own. Back on the battlefield, Pino charges at his enemies, finally realizing how bad things really are. Coco accepts her failure and the fact that she betrayed Louis's trust. She gives Pino props for being the best commander and for going against the odds to chase the Empire's dream. Pino charges at Mammoot, knowing he's already lost, and dies an honorable death in battle. Mammoot takes out Coco and raises Pino's head on a spike as a trophy. With that, Mammoot claims victory and waits for the sunrise. When dawn breaks, he gathers the spoils of war and tells one of his fellow Pashas to split the loot between Lince and the others, who fought hard to protect Espada. Lince is surprised by the massive payout, but knows the Torquians are solid people who always keep their word. Mammoot finally earns the respect of his whole army. After a crazy long war that went on for days, he tells his guys to get some solid rest so they can make it back to Cielo in one piece. As the soldiers head off, Mammoot is still grieving the loss of his foster dad. Meanwhile, some coward who managed to escape the enemy shows up at the camp to tell Frenzel and Adam that Pino is moving toward Espada. Even though the guy claims Pino is headed there, Frenzel figures Pino was probably forced to go. For now, they decide to pull back from the fight and head home to avoid losing more men. As for the losers holding Carbajal hostage in the Tower of Silence, they realize they've been found when the three musketeers start climbing the tower. To stop them, the losers chuck rocks, managing to knock Kiros and Erbok back, but Abariga keeps going. Kiros badmouths Abariga, while the citizens, armed and freaked out, gather around. The losers and the panicked citizens are scared they've been double-crossed by Venedict and Torquier. Kiros tries to hype up Mammoot's success, but the idiots don't buy it. One of the citizens calls out Augusto, the moron who locked Carbajal in the tower, and tells him to come out with the director. Augusto shows up with his buddy, holding a sword to Carbajal's throat, and announces he's gonna kill Carbajal for defying the Empire. One of the OG citizens there is like, yeah, go for it, but then a refugee calls him out for being a jerk and supporting an illegal execution. Pretty soon, a fight breaks out between the refugee and some citizens. Cassandra steps in, warning them not to fight each other since they were all refugees once. While Abariga climbs the wall to rescue Carbajal, Carbajal tries to buy time by giving a final speech to the citizens before they kill him. He says some over-the-top stuff, then finally apologizes for not doing enough and pissing everyone off. After that, he leaves things to Cassandra and accepts his fate. Abariga almost reaches him, but Solomon, the loser, slashes Carbajal's throat at the last second. After the director is killed, there's a heavy silence, and Cassandra picks up Carbajal's head, calling his death the will of the people. As for Frenzel and Adam, they argue about retreating. Adam thinks it's too soon to bail, worried Cielo might come after them if they find out. Frenzel tells him not to sweat it and focus on the 5-0 El Toro soldiers marching their way. They start retreating, and sure enough, Cielo gets wind of it. That's when the idiots realize they killed their director for nothing. By nightfall, Mammoot and the others make it to Cielo, where a funeral service for Carbajal is already underway. Erbok waits for a chance to point fingers, but Mammoot surprises him by staying calm and acting mature about it. While Augustus and Solomon try to make excuses for themselves, Cassandra shuts them down, telling them to stop talking and just follow the director's words from now on. By the end of her speech, Solomon and Augustus feel like total trash for being such useless, pathetic losers. Cassandra talks with Mammoot a bit more before saying her goodbyes. Before heading back to Torquier, Mammoot puts the people of Cielo in charge of the anti-imperial alliance until they can grow a backbone and lead themselves. After that, Abiriga and Kiros hang out with the El Toro guys to discuss why Venedict is taking so long. During their chat, Elbark's respect for Mammoot grows even more. Meanwhile, Mammoot stays behind to finish attending the director's funeral before heading back to Torquia. After the Cielo War, some folks in the anti-imperial alliance started tossing around the idea of letting Espada take control of Cielo. Out of 55 countries, 38 were on board with the plan, but then Lucio Doge from Venedict gave this killer speech, and Torquia Pashalu ended up claiming Cielo for themselves. At the next big meeting, Buyuk Pasha put Mammoot in charge as governor of Cielo and picked a crew of officials to help him out. Before wrapping up military stuff, Buyuk Pasha also tapped Mimar Zeki Pasha to lead the city's rebuilding efforts. Mammoot's feeling pretty good about the gig and dives into his new responsibilities. Before the meeting ends, Mammoot gets up and tells everyone that Cielo can't keep relying on handouts from other countries now that it's part of Torquia Pashalu. He's already got plans to rebuild the city of Imalet in Cielo, hoping the project will generate enough cash to fund the city's future. One of the Pashas asks how he's planning to get the land for such a big project. Zeki, the construction guy, suggests knocking down some poor folks' homes and rebuilding them elsewhere, but Zaganos isn't feeling that idea. He thinks Torquay should respect the pride and traditions of the Kielo people by keeping their original system intact. His reasoning? If Torquay ever grows into a full-blown empire, Cielo could be its first province. This idea catches everyone off guard since no one had thought of it before. Zeki tries to shut Zaganos down with accusations, but Zaganos fires back, explaining how great empires in history like Baltrine and Phoenike were built. By the end of it, Mammoot gives in and agrees with Zaganos' plan. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Minister Louis is getting grilled by other ministers in his empire. They're pushing for peace with Torquay and an end to the fighting, but Louis isn't ready to throw in the towel. He points out that their military is still 8 times stronger than Torquay's, and they've gained territories like Scoglio and Campana during the campaign. He doesn't get why everyone's so worked up. An old man suggests they make peace and focus on managing what they've got left, but Louis reminds them about Zaganos Pasha, the guy running the divan, who would stop at nothing to bring their empire down. Elsewhere, Kiros, Abariga, and Suleiman are chatting about their leader's future before the conversation shifts to Zaganos' big plans. As a top-ranking Pasha, Mammoot has a lot riding on him, especially from the people. But honestly, Zaganos' idea doesn't seem too bad since the timing feels right to make a move. After the meeting, Mammoot and Zaganos have their usual one-on-one. This time Zaganos gives Mammoot props for avenging Halil Pasha's death. But Mammoot surprises him by saying that wasn't his goal. Turns out, Mahmoud doesn't hate the people of the empire, he just hates the war and the jerk who keeps fueling it for selfish reasons. Zaganos is caught off guard for once, but doesn't let Mahmoud win the argument. Instead, he tells Mahmoud that while he might be wrong, he also has a point. Zaganos admits they're different, but accepts it. Mahmoud then asks if Zaganos is still set on attacking the empire. When Zaganos says yes, Mahmoud pleads with him to stop the war no matter what. But Zaganos knows the fighting won't end unless they take down the Baltrine Empire and its destructive ways. He wishes Mammoot the best and encourages him to keep pushing forward, hoping he'll eventually fill the gap left by Halil Pasha. Up next, Louis hosts a lunch chat with Duchess Lele and Glalat. They talk about winning over the people by using his family's resources and taxes from their new territories to build social welfare buildings. The goal? To keep doing whatever they want in other territories. Lele is blown away by his wild ideas, but Louis spots a big problem: Zaganos Pasha's determination. He knows Zaganos won't stop until he takes down the empire. Lele brushes Zaganos off, but Louis asks if she's heard of Mammoot Pasha. Glalat chimes in, saying Mammoot's a nobody and not worth worrying about. Lele agrees, but for now, their focus is on Zaganos, the loyal servant. A few days later, the Divan gives Zaganos the green light to invade the empire with 40,000 Torquian troops. As Zaganos rides out of Torquay, Suleiman, Kiros, and Abiriga talk about his plan, calling it a once-in-a-lifetime shot to crush the empire. Meanwhile, Mammoot gets some solid construction plans for Imalet from Zeki. The two shake hands and join Zaganos. Before leaving for Cielo to oversee the city's rebuilding, Mammoot says goodbye to Suleiman and Zaganos. In Cielo, he greets Elbark and meets with Cassandra to talk about how things are going. Cassandra thanks him for helping rebuild while respecting their pride. To honor Carbajal's memory, Mahmoud asks Cassandra if he can name the city Carbajal's Imalet. She agrees with a smile. At the same time, Zeki and the pink-haired Pasha chat about their current project and how it honors Halil Pasha's legacy. Later that evening, Blanca and Vasco finally meet Mahmoud Pasha. Vasco shows Mahmoud his new weapon plans to use against the empire, but Mahmoud, like Halil Pasha before him, realizes the empire could copy it and turn it against them. So, he burns the plans and tells Vasco he'll understand why when he's older. For now, Mahmoud advises him to focus his smarts on creating things that save lives. Blanca watches as her new buddy Vasco faces rejection yet again. Meanwhile, Frenzel and Adam worry about another invasion, convinced Mahmoud Pasha is coming for them. Louis goes back to brainstorming ways to start a war with their neighbors. Zaganos reaches Hisar and thanks Ibrahim, the Valley of Hisar, for finishing the Sinual Cap in just 4 months. With it done, even the empire will struggle to invade. Ibrahim wishes Zaganos luck on his campaign and lets him through the gates. That same day, Zaganos begins his mission to conquer the Baltrine Empire. Mahmoud reflects on how far he's come, pays his respects to the legendary Halil Pasha, and keeps pushing forward on his path to greatness.